12 years. That is how long a queen can bleed in silence before the whole damn empire smells it. Tonight, you will watch a woman walk into a tower she was never meant to open and find the one truth her king buried alive. But here is what nobody is ready for. The monster in this story is not who you think. Stay with me until the very last word. If this story cuts you open, hit that like button, drop your city in the comments, and let me see where my people are watching from tonight. Now settle in. This is going to hurt. The rain had not stopped for 6 days. It came sideways off the Ashenmoor cliffs, hammering the slate roofs of Draven Keep until every corridor echoed with the sound of a kingdom trying to drown itself. Servants moved through the halls with their heads down, rags pressed to the leaking stone, and nobody spoke above a whisper because the king had not slept in 3 nights, and a sleepless king was a dangerous animal. Celine Vale stood at the window of her private study, watching lightning split the sky above the West Tower. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. 34 years old, sharp-jawed, dark circles pressed deep beneath gray eyes that had once been called beautiful. Now they were just tired. She pressed her palm flat against the cold pane and counted the seconds between thunder. 14, 12, 9. The storm was getting closer. Behind her, the fire crackled and spat. A cup of blackroot tea sat untouched on the desk beside 3 unsigned trade agreements and a letter from the Northern Border Council she had been avoiding for 2 weeks. The letter demanded more soldiers. The agreements demanded her seal. The tea demanded nothing, which is why she liked it. She heard the footsteps before the knock came, too heavy for a maid, too hesitant for a guard. "Come in," she said without turning. The door opened and Marin Hale stepped inside, rain still dripping from her cloak. Marin was the queen's shield, her personal guard, her shadow, her only remaining friend inside these walls who did not also report to the king. She was built like a siege weapon. Broad shoulders, cropped red hair, a scar that ran from her left ear to the corner of her mouth from a border skirmish 6 years back. She never smiled, which Celine appreciated. Smiling people in this palace were usually lying. "You need to come with me," Marin said. Her voice was low. Not the low of secrecy, the low of something wrong. Celine turned. "Now?" "Right now." Marin's jaw was tight. She was gripping the hilt of her sword the way she only did when she was trying not to hit something. Celine studied her for a long moment. "Where?" Marin did not answer immediately. She looked at the door behind her, then back at the queen, and Celine saw it. Something she had almost never seen in the woman's face. Fear. "The West Tower," Marin said. Celine felt the floor shift beneath her feet. Not literally, but something inside her chest dropped like a stone into black water and kept sinking. "Nobody goes into the West Tower," she said. "It has been sealed since the Restoration." "Ronan ordered it himself," Marin nodded slowly. "That is what I thought too, until 20 minutes ago when I watched Theron Voss carry a tray of food through the lower passage and unlock the iron gate with a key I have never seen before." Theron Voss, the king's personal steward, the man who had served Ronan since before the war, before the coronation, before any of it. The man who once told Celine to her face that he answered to one voice and one voice alone. She felt her pulse climb. "What kind of food?" Marin blinked. "What? What was on the tray, Marin?" "Roasted quail, winter pears, a bottle of Ceresian wine, the kind you only open for someone you are trying to impress." Celine's throat went dry. "That wine came from the royal cellar. She signed for every bottle herself. Nobody was supposed to access it without her mark on the ledger." She looked at the rain. She looked at the fire. She looked at the unsigned trade agreements that suddenly seemed like the smallest problems in the world. "Take me there," she said. They moved through the palace like ghosts. Down the east corridor, past the portrait gallery, where 12 generations of Draven kings stared down from oil and gold leaf with the same cold eyes Ronan wore when he was lying. Through the servants' passage behind the great hall, where the stone turned rough and the air tasted like mildew and old iron. The further they went, the fewer torches lined the walls. This part of the keep had been abandoned after the siege, or so Celine had been told. She had never had reason to question it. Now she questioned everything. Marin walked ahead, one hand on her blade, the other tracing the wall. They reached a staircase that spiraled downward into darkness. then curved sharply upward again, a defensive design meant to disorient invaders. At the top, a narrow corridor stretched toward a single iron gate. Celine stopped. There was light behind the gate. Not torchlight. Something warmer. Candles, maybe. Dozens of them. And she could hear something, faint, muffled by the stone. Someone was humming. "Celine," Marin whispered, "I need you to be ready for whatever is behind that door." Celine looked at her. "I have been queen of this empire for 12 years. I have survived 2 assassination attempts, a famine, and a husband who has not touched me in 14 months. I am ready." She pushed the gate open. The room was not a cell. That was the first thing that registered and the thing that hurt the most. It was a chamber, furnished, heated, draped in deep burgundy fabric with silver thread. A fire burned in a stone hearth. A bookshelf lined one wall, filled with volumes Celine recognized from her own library. A vanity table sat near the window, covered in oils, combs, and a silver mirror. And in the center of the room, sitting in a cushioned chair with her bare feet tucked beneath her and a hand resting on the swell of her belly, was a young woman. She was maybe 22, maybe younger. Honey brown hair that fell past her shoulders. Skin so pale, it looked like she had not seen sunlight in months. She wore a nightgown made of silk, not servant silk, not merchant silk, but the kind that came from the royal textile house, the kind Celine herself wore on formal evenings. The woman looked up. Her eyes were wide, wet, the color of chestnuts after rain. For 3 full seconds, nobody breathed. Then the woman's hand moved to her belly, protective, instinctive, and she whispered, "He told me no one would come." Celine stood in the doorway with the rain pounding the stone above her head and the fire crackling in a room that should not exist, and looked at this woman, this girl, and felt something crack open in her chest that she had spent 12 years bricking shut. "Who are you?" she said. Her voice came out flat, controlled. The voice of a queen who had learned a long time ago that showing pain was the same as showing a wound to wolves. The woman swallowed, her fingers tightened on the fabric of her gown. "Please, I did not ask for this." Celine stepped into the room. Marin stayed at the door, one hand still on her sword. "I'm going to ask you one more time," Celine said. "Who are you, and why are you in my palace?" The woman looked at the fire, at the floor, at her own swollen belly. Then she looked back at Celine, and something shifted behind her eyes. Not defiance, but the desperate courage of an animal that knows the trap has already closed. "My name is Evelina," she said. "Evelina Dane. And the king brought me here 5 months ago. He said this was where I would be safe until the child came." Celine heard the words. She processed them the way she processed all information, methodically, surgically, stripping away emotion to get at the bone beneath. "The child," she repeated. Evelina nodded. She was shaking now. His child. The room went very quiet. Even the rain seemed to pause. Celine looked at the silk nightgown, at the Ceresian wine on the side table, still corked, at the books from her library, at the vanity covered in oils that she herself used every morning. Ronan had not just hidden a woman in the West Tower. He had built her a life, a careful, deliberate replica of comfort, furnished with pieces stolen from his own queen's world, as if the act of giving this girl Celine's things somehow made the betrayal less obscene. She felt her knees go soft. She locked them. She would not sit down in this room. She would not show weakness in a space constructed from her husband's lies. "How far along?" she said. Evelina hesitated. 7 months. Maybe closer to 8. I have lost count. And he visits you." Evelina's gaze dropped to the floor. "He used to. Every few days. Now it is less. He sends Theron mostly. With food, with messages." "Messages," Celine said. "What kind of messages?" "That I should be patient. That everything will change after the child is born. That he will make it right." "Make it right," Celine repeated, and for the first time her voice cracked, just barely, a hairline fracture in the stone, before she sealed it shut again. She turned to Marin. The guard's face was unreadable, but her knuckles were white around the hilt of her blade. "Get me out of this room," Celine said. They left the West Tower the same way they had entered, through the forgotten corridors, past the dead torches. up the spiral staircase that smelled like mold and old war. Neither of them spoke until they reached Celine's study, where the fire had burned down to coals and the rain still hammered the glass. Celine closed the door. She locked it. She stood with her back against the wood and pressed both hands flat against the grain and breathed in, out, in, out. She was not going to fall apart. She had decided that years ago, after the second assassination attempt, when she had pulled a poisoned needle from the collar of her own dress, and realized that survival in this court was not about strength. It was about refusing to die in the way they expected. "How long have you known?" she said. Marin shook her head. "I swear on my blood, I found out tonight, the same as you. Theron must have been using the lower passage for months. It is not on any guard rotation. Nobody patrols that section. Because Ronan ordered it sealed. Because Ronan ordered it sealed." Yes. Celine closed her eyes. Behind her lids, she saw Evelina's face. The fear in those wet chestnut eyes. The way her hand had moved to her belly. That ancient, wordless gesture of a mother shielding what she had made. She opened her eyes. "I need to know everything about Evelina Dane," she said. "Where she came from. Who her family is. How she entered this palace. And I need to know without Ronan finding out I was in that tower tonight. Can you do that?" Marin nodded. "I will start before dawn." Celine moved to her desk and sat down. She picked up the cup of blackroot tea. It was cold. She drank it anyway. Cold tea was still tea. A queen who could not adapt to discomfort had no business sitting on a throne. "One more thing," she said. Marin paused at the door. "That wine on the table. The Ceresian red. Check the cellar ledger in the morning. My signature should be on every withdrawal. If there is a bottle missing without my mark, someone forged it, and I want to know who." Marin left. The door closed, and Celine sat alone in the dark study with a storm raging outside and a dead fire at her back, and thought about the man she had married 12 years ago. She remembered the night of their bonding ceremony. She had been 22. The same age Evelina was now, she realized with a sick twist in her gut. Ronan had been 28, already Alpha King for 3 years, already scarred from the border wars, already carrying the weight of an empire on shoulders that were too young and too stubborn to bend. He had taken her hand in front of 1,000 witnesses and said the words that were supposed to mean something. "I bind my blood to yours. I bind my shadow to your light. What I am, you will share. What I carry, you will know." 12 years later, she did not even know about the room in the West Tower. She thought about the 14 months since he had last reached for her in the dark. She had told herself it was the pressure of the northern border conflict. She had told herself it was the weight of ruling. She had told herself a dozen different lies, each one more comfortable than the last, because the alternative, that he simply did not want her anymore, was a wound she was not ready to examine. Now she had her answer, and it was worse than indifference. He had not stopped wanting. He had just started wanting someone else. Dawn came gray and wet, the storm finally breaking into a thin drizzle that clung to the windows like a film of grief. Celine had not slept. She had spent the night reading every report from the past 6 months. Supply orders, staffing rotations, construction logs for the eastern wall repairs. She was looking for patterns, for gaps, for the fingerprints of a secret that had been living inside her home. She found them. A requisition for additional heating fuel to the West Tower, filed under maintenance and signed by Theron Voss. A textile order for fabric matching the royal household specifications, but delivered to an unlisted address within the keep. A physician's visit logged to the servants' wing on a date when no servants had reported illness. She cross-referenced the infirmary records herself. Ronan had been careful, but careful was not the same as invisible, and Celine had spent 12 years managing the logistics of an empire. She knew what a supply chain looked like when it was feeding something that was not supposed to exist. By mid-morning, she had dressed in formal attire, high-collared black, her silver crown pinned tight against dark hair, and taken her seat in the council chamber as if the world had not tilted on its axis overnight. The council met every third day, and today was trade disputes and border funding. She sat at the long oak table across from Lord Cassius Mond, the treasury keeper, and Lady Petra Hale, Marin's older cousin, who oversaw the grain stores and spoke with the blunt efficiency of someone who had grown up counting calories in a famine. Ronan sat at the head of the table. He looked exhausted. His dark hair was uncombed, his jaw shadowed with stubble, and his eyes, black as wet coal, carried the haunted edge of a man who had been sleeping badly and did not want anyone to ask why. He did not look at Celine. He had not looked at her properly in months. "The border report?" Lord Cassius began, adjusting his spectacles. "3 more villages along the northern reach have reported raids. Commander Vero is requesting additional cavalry units and—" "I read the report," Ronan said. His voice was rough, sandpaper on stone. He leaned back in his chair and pressed his thumb against his temple. "Grant him half." "We cannot strip the southern garrisons. Half will not hold the line," Lady Petra said. "Lucien Vero himself wrote that the situation requires—" "I said half," Ronan repeated. The words landed like a door slamming. Lady Petra closed her mouth. Lord Cassius wrote something in his ledger without looking up. Celine watched her husband from across the table. She studied the way his hand trembled when he reached for his water. She noticed the fresh cut on his knuckle, probably from hitting a wall, a habit he had when the pressure built too high. She saw the way his gaze flicked to the door every few minutes, as if expecting someone or dreading someone. She had spent 12 years reading this man like a weather map. She knew when storms were forming, and right now he was a hurricane trying to sit still in a wooden chair. "The grain stores for the Eastern District," Celine said, keeping her voice neutral. "I noticed a discrepancy in the winter allocation." Every head at the table turned to her. She rarely spoke during military discussions. She handled economics, logistics, civilian governance, the invisible architecture that kept the empire standing while the men argued about swords. Ronan's eyes met hers for the first time that morning. Something flashed behind them. Surprise, then wariness, then a careful blankness that she recognized as guilt wearing a mask. "What kind of discrepancy?" he said. Celine held his gaze. "Heating fuel. There's a surplus order routed through the maintenance ledger that does not correspond to any occupied section of the keep. I assumed it was a clerical error, but I wanted to flag it before the auditors catch it at year's end." The room went still. Ronan did not blink. He was good at that. The stillness of a predator who had learned to control every muscle in his body. But Celine saw his jaw clench, just barely, just enough. "I will have Theron look into it," he said. "Probably a misfile." "Probably," Celine agreed. She picked up her quill and made a note in her ledger and said nothing else for the rest of the meeting, but inside her blood was screaming. After the council dispersed, she found Marin waiting in the corridor outside the East Library. The guard fell into step beside her as they walked. "Tell me," Celine said. Marin kept her eyes forward. Evelina Dane, 22 years old, daughter of Henrik Dane, a minor lord in the Ashfall province. The family lost their lands 3 years ago during the border redistribution. Henrik owed the crown a debt he could not pay. He died of fever 18 months ago, leaving Evelina and a younger brother with nothing. "How did she end up here?" Marin's voice dropped. "As far as I can trace, she was brought to the capital 9 months ago as part of a household staff transfer. She was assigned to the textile house. But the textile house has no record of her past the first week, because someone moved her. Because someone moved her into the tower." "Yes." Celine stopped walking. She turned to face Marin in the empty corridor where the only sound was the drip of rainwater from a cracked ceiling joint. "The physician," she said, "the one who visited the servants' wing on the 14th of last month. Did you find a name?" Marin nodded. "Dr. Aldrich Wren. He is not on the palace staff. He operates a private practice in the lower city, specializes in complicated birth." Celine felt the implications settle over her like a shroud. Ronan had hired an outside physician. He had kept the pregnancy off palace records. He had built an entire shadow infrastructure to protect this secret. And he had done it all while sitting across from his wife at the council table and pretending the world was exactly as she believed it to be. The depth of the deception was not what hurt the most. What hurt the most was the care he had taken. The silk nightgown, the books from her library, the Ceresian wine. He had not hidden Evelina in squalor. He had hidden her in luxury. The kind of luxury that said, "This is not a mistake, this is a choice." He had chosen. And he had not chosen Celine. She started walking again, faster now. "I want to see her again," she said. "Celine," Marin's voice carried a warning. "If Ronan finds out, he will not find out. He is meeting with the border commanders this afternoon. He will be in the war room until nightfall. That gives us 4 hours. And what exactly are you going to do? Celine did not answer right away. She kept walking, her boots striking the stone with the precise rhythm of a woman who had made a decision and was no longer interested in debating it. I'm going to talk to her, she said. Not as a queen, not as a wife, just as a woman who deserves the truth from another woman who has been living inside a lie. Marin exhaled through her nose. You are going to get us both killed. No, Celine said. I am going to find out what is really happening in that tower. Because something does not add up, Marin. A pregnant woman locked in a hidden room, terrified, claiming the king made her promises. And yet the king himself looks like he has not slept in weeks. Guilty men sleep badly, but so do men who are afraid. And right now, Ronan does not look like a man enjoying his secret. He looks like a man trapped inside one. They reached the entrance to the lower passage. Marin unlocked it with a key she had taken from a dead guard's quarters. Old, rusted, but still functional. The passage was cold and dark, the walls slick with condensation. Celine descended into the blackness without hesitation. She had spent her entire reign walking into rooms where she was not welcome. This was just another one. When she pushed open the iron gate for the second time in 12 hours, Evelina was standing at the narrow window, one hand pressed against the glass, the other cradling the underside of her belly. She spun around when the gate creaked, and the terror that flooded her face was so raw, so immediate, that Celine had to stop herself from stepping back. Please, Evelina said. Her voice was shaking. Please, I will do whatever you want, just do not hurt the baby. The words hit Celine like a fist to the sternum, not because they were dramatic, because they were real. This woman was not performing fear, she was drowning in it. Celine raised both hands, palms out. I am not here to hurt anyone, she said. She kept her voice low, steady, the way she would talk to a spooked horse. I am here to understand. Evelina stared at her. Her breathing was ragged, her chest rising and falling too fast. Celine could see the pulse hammering in her throat. You are the queen, Evelina whispered. Yes. He said you would never find me. Celine let that sentence land. She let it sit in the room between them like a corpse on a table. He was wrong, she said. Evelina's legs gave out. Not dramatically, not a faint or a collapse. She simply stopped being able to stand. She sank into the chair by the hearth and pressed both hands over her face and made a sound that was not quite crying and not quite breathing, but something terrible in between. Celine pulled a second chair from the corner of the room and sat down across from her, close enough to see the trembling in Evelina's fingers, far enough to give her space. She waited. Outside, the rain had picked up again. Inside the tower, the fire crackled. Somewhere deep in the palace, Ronan was bent over a war table, moving wooden figures across a map and pretending his kingdom was only threatened from the outside. Evelina lowered her hands. Her eyes were red, her cheeks blotched, and snot glistened on her upper lip. She wiped it with the back of her sleeve, the sleeve of a silk gown that cost more than her dead father had earned in a year. What do you want to know? She said. Her voice was hollow, emptied out. Everything, Celine said, starting with the truth. Evelina laughed. It was a horrible sound, broken glass scraped across a plate. The truth. Nobody in this palace wants the truth. They want the version that keeps them comfortable. Try me, Celine said. Evelina looked at her, really looked. And whatever she saw in the queen's face, the exhaustion, the rage held on a leash, the 12 years of silence that had calcified into something harder than anger, it must have been enough, because she started talking. He found me in the textile house, Evelina said. I had been there a week. I was sorting wool when he walked through on an inspection. He stopped. He looked at me. And I knew, every woman knows, what that look means when it comes from a man who has the power to take whatever he wants. Celine said nothing. Her hands were folded in her lap, perfectly still. Inside her chest, something was burning. He did not force me, Evelina continued quickly. I need you to know that. He asked. He was gentle. He came back the next day and the next. He brought me things. Books. Wine. He said I reminded him of someone he had lost a long time ago. He said he had been lonely for years. Celine's jaw tightened so hard she felt her teeth creak. He said he and his queen had grown apart, that the marriage was political, that there was no love left between you. Evelina's voice shrank to almost nothing. I believed him. I know that makes me foolish, but when a king tells you his heart is empty and you are the one filling it, you believe. Because the alternative is that you are just a girl with nothing and a man with everything. Chose you for no reason, and that is too terrifying to accept. Celine closed her eyes. She counted to 5. She opened them. When did you find out about the child? She said. 3 months after he brought me here. Evelina pressed her palm against her belly. He was happy, happier than I had ever seen him. He said the child would change everything, that he would find a way to make it legitimate, that I would stand beside him. As what? Celine said. Evelina met her eyes. As his mate, she whispered, his true mate. The words hung in the air between them like smoke from a burning house. Celine stood. She walked to the window and looked out at the rain and the gray sky and the distant black line of the northern mountains where Commander Lucien Varro was currently fighting to hold the border of an empire that was rotting from the inside. She thought about the word true mate, as if 12 years of holding this kingdom together through famine and assassination and the grinding loneliness of sleeping next to a man who was already dreaming of someone else, as if all of that was somehow false. A placeholder. A rough draft of a life waiting to be replaced by the real thing. She breathed. Then she turned back to Evelina and said something she had not planned to say. Something that came not from the queen, but from the woman underneath. He told me the same thing once, she said, that I would change everything, that I was the one who made his heart feel less empty. Evelina's face crumpled. I need you to answer me carefully, Celine said. She crossed the room and knelt in front of the younger woman's chair, bringing their faces level. Evelina flinched but did not pull away. When Ronan visits you, Celine said, how does he touch you? Evelina blinked. I do not. Does he hold your hand? Does he sit close? Does he reach for you the way a man reaches for someone he desires? Think, remember, tell me exactly. Evelina's brow furrowed. She was thinking. Celine could see her cycling through memories, sorting them, and something was shifting behind her eyes. Confusion replacing certainty, like a crack spreading through glass. He sits across from me, Evelina said slowly. He talks. He asks about the baby. He brings things. But She stopped. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. He does not touch me. Not anymore. Not since I started showing. Celine nodded. She had expected that. Ronan was many things. Brutal, proud, desperately lonely. But he was also a man governed by obsession. And obsession was not the same as love. Obsession was about possession, about the idea of a thing, not the thing itself. He does not love you, Celine said. She did not say it with cruelty. She said it the way a surgeon says this is going to hurt, because it was necessary. One more thing. Evelina waited. The letters, Celine said. The ones you keep hidden in the drawer beneath the false bottom of your vanity? Evelina went white. Every drop of blood drained from her face so fast that Celine thought she might actually pass out. I noticed the scratches on the wood when I was here last night, Celine said. Fresh scratches. The kind you make when you open and close a hidden compartment in a hurry. Who are you writing to, Evelina? The young woman's mouth was trembling. Her hands were clenched so tight in her lap that her knuckles looked like they might split the skin. Celine waited. Patient. Still. The way a hunter waits when the prey is deciding whether to run or surrender. Outside, the storm broke open again. Thunder rolled across the mountains like the voice of something old and furious. And in the hidden room at the top of the West Tower, a girl with a secret inside a secret looked at the queen she had been told to fear and made a choice. I cannot tell you, Evelina whispered. If I tell you, he will die. Celine felt the air change. She felt the entire architecture of what she thought she understood shift and reform into something new, something darker, more tangled, more dangerous than a king's infidelity. Who? She said. Evelina shook her head. Tears were streaming down her face now, silent and fast. Please, you do not understand. I did this to protect him. Everything I have done, the lies, the tower, letting Ronan believe all of it was to keep him alive. Celine leaned closer, her voice dropped to barely a breath. The child is not Ronan's. Evelina broke. She broke the way a dam breaks, not all at once, but in pieces. Cracks spreading outward until the whole structure gives way and everything behind it comes flooding through. She sobbed with her whole body, shoulders heaving, mouth open in a silent scream, and the sound that finally came out was not a word but a name, whispered through so much grief that Celine almost did not catch it. Almost. But she did. And the name changed everything. Because the father of the child growing inside Evelina Dane was not the Alpha King. It was not some minor lord or faceless servant. It was the one man Ronan trusted more than anyone alive. The man who held the northern border. The man who commanded the largest standing army in the empire. The man who sat at the king's right hand in every war council and called him brother. Commander Lucien Varro. Celine stood slowly. Her knees ached. Her head was pounding. The room felt too small, the walls pressing inward, the fire too hot. She looked at Evelina, weeping, pregnant, terrified, wrapped in silk stolen from a queen's wardrobe, and understood for the first time that this was not a story about a cheating king and a hidden mistress. This was a story about a lie so deep it had roots growing in every direction, feeding on fear and ambition and the desperate animal need to survive. And at the center of it all, like the eye of the storm still raging outside, was a child who did not yet exist in the world but had already become the most dangerous thing in the empire. Celine walked to the door. She stopped. She did not turn around. "I am going to find out the truth," she said. "All of it. And when I do, I will decide what happens next. Not Ronan. Not Lucien. Not you. Me." She paused. "In the meantime, you will eat, you will rest, and you will stop writing letters because the next person who finds that hidden drawer might not be as patient as I am." She stepped through the iron gate and pulled it shut behind her. The sound of metal meeting metal rang through the corridor like a bell tolling the end of something. A marriage, a kingdom, a lie that had held both together for longer than anyone knew. Marin was waiting at the bottom of the stairs. She took one look at Celine's face and said nothing. They walked back through the dark passage in silence. When they reached the Queen's study, Celine locked the door and sat down at her desk and stared at the wall for a very long time. Then she pulled a blank sheet of parchment toward her and began to write. Not a letter, not a report, a list. Every name, every date, every discrepancy she had found in the ledgers, every lie she had been told and every lie she had told herself. At the top of the page she wrote 2 words. Winter moon. The banquet was 8 weeks away. The entire court would be assembled. Every noble house, every commander, every advisor and ally and enemy who wore fine clothes and sharper smiles. 8 weeks to uncover the full truth. 8 weeks to build a case so airtight that not even an Alpha King could claw his way out. 8 weeks before Queen Celine Vale stopped bleeding in silence and made the whole damn empire watch. She set down the quill. She looked at the storm outside her window, and somewhere deep in the marrow of her bones, in the place where queens are forged and wolves learn to bare their teeth, she smiled. It was not a kind smile. It was not meant to be. The list grew like a tumor. Every night after the council adjourned and Ronan disappeared into whatever black hole he crawled into when he thought no one was watching, Celine sat at her desk and added to it. Names, dates, supply requisitions, guard rotations that had been quietly altered over the past 9 months. She cross-referenced everything against the palace ledgers she controlled, and the picture that emerged was not just damning, it was architectural. Ronan had not stumbled into this betrayal. He had engineered it with the same ruthless precision he used to plan military campaigns. But Celine was not building a case against her husband. Not yet. She was building a case against everyone. 3 days after her second visit to the tower, Marin brought her a name she had not expected. They were in the Queen's private armory, a small stone room behind the East Library that Celine had converted into a meeting space years ago, precisely because it had no windows, no servants' passages, and only one door. Marin spread a series of documents across the table. Stolen, borrowed, or copied. Celine did not ask which. Evelina Dane did not come to the capital through a household staff transfer, Marin said. That paperwork was forged. Good forgery, but the seals are wrong. Whoever made them used the old crest, the one we retired after the border redistribution. Celine leaned forward. Then how did she get here? Marin tapped a folded letter at the edge of the table. I found this in the lower city, a courier named Brennan Holt. He runs messages between the capital and the northern border camps. For a price, he also runs people. Celine picked up the letter. It was a transport manifest. Names, dates, wagon assignments. Evelina Dane's name appeared on a list dated 9 months ago, traveling south from the Ashfall province to the capital. The manifest was stamped with a military seal. She looked at Marin. Whose seal is this? Marin's jaw tightened. Northern Border Command. Lucien Vero. Celine set the letter down. She pressed her fingers against the table until her knuckles ached. The stone was cold. She wanted it colder. She wanted something sharp enough to cut through the fog of implications settling around her like smoke. He sent her here, Celine said. Lucien sent her to the capital. Knowing what? Knowing she was already carrying his child? That is the question, Marin said. Either he sent her to hide the pregnancy from the border camps where it would have been noticed within weeks, or he sent her for another reason entirely, and the pregnancy complicated things after she arrived. Celine stood. She paced the small room. 4 steps to the wall, 4 steps back. Her mind was working the way it always worked under pressure, sorting variables, weighing probabilities, discarding the emotional noise to get at the mechanical truth beneath. Timeline, she said. Evelina is roughly 8 months along. She arrived in the capital 9 months ago. That means she was either already pregnant when she left the border, or she conceived within the first few weeks of arriving. Marin nodded. If she conceived here, the father could theoretically be Ronan. The timing works. But she told me it is Lucian's child. She told you that while sobbing and terrified and locked in a room by a man who controls whether she lives or dies. Marin crossed her arms. I am not saying she lied. I am saying fear makes people say whatever keeps them breathing for the next 5 minutes. Celine stopped pacing. She looked at Marin, really looked, and saw the thing neither of them wanted to name. The thing that made this so much worse than a simple affair. You think she does not know, Celine said. I think it is possible she genuinely does not know who the father is, Marin said, and I think that uncertainty is what is keeping her alive. Because as long as Ronan believes the child is his, he protects her. And as long as Lucien believes the child is his, he keeps sending messages and money through that courier. She has 2 powerful men investing in her survival, and the moment the truth comes out, whichever truth it is, one of them stops, and the other one kills her. Marin said nothing. She did not need to. Celine sat back down. She picked up the transport manifest and read it again, slower this time, letting every detail register. The wagon had departed from a camp called Ashmark, 60 miles south of the main border fortification. Lucien Vero's personal command post. I need to talk to Lucien, Celine said. Marin's expression did not change, but the temperature in the room dropped by 10 degrees. Lucien Vero is 600 miles north. Even a fast rider would take. I am not sending a rider. Celine folded the manifest and slid it into the inner pocket of her coat. The Winter Moon banquet is in 8 weeks. Every commander in the Empire is required to attend. Lucien will be here, and when he arrives, I will be ready. Ready for what, exactly? Celine met her eyes. To find out which of these men destroyed my life, and which one is about to destroy the Empire. The weeks that followed were the loneliest of Celine's reign. She could not confide in the council. Lord Cassius was loyal to procedure, not people. He would report the irregularities in the ledgers to Ronan before Celine could blink. Lady Petra was sharp but politically cautious. The kind of woman who would sooner cut a diseased limb than risk the infection spreading to her own house. And the other council members, Lord Aldrich of the Eastern Province, Commander Gareth Stone of the Southern Guard, the trade envoys and tax collectors and minor lords who filled seats and nodded at the appropriate moments. They were all, in their own small ways, pieces on a board that Ronan controlled. Celine had no allies. She had Marin. And she had the list. She added to it every night. She cross-referenced palace accounts against border supply chains and found a thread of payments, small amounts, always in coin, never documented in the official treasury, flowing from the capital to a private account in the merchant district. The account was registered to a woman named Ilara Voss, Theron Voss's sister. The money had been moving for 7 months. She traced the physician. Dr. Aldrich Wren had visited the West Tower 4 times in the past 3 months. Celine sent Marin to his practice in the lower city with a cover story about a pregnant servant needing discreet care. Marin came back with a receipt for prenatal tonics and a conversation she relayed in the armory with the door locked. "He is scared," Marin said. "He knows he is in over his head. He told me the pregnancy is high risk. The girl is small and the baby is large, and he has been trying to convince whoever is paying him to move her to a proper facility. He was told no, too visible." Celine absorbed this. "Who is paying him?" "Theron. Always Theron. The doctor has never met the king directly. He was told the patient is a ward of the crown, kept in protective custody for political reasons." Celine almost laughed. Almost. But laughter required a kind of energy she no longer had. She was running on blackroot tea and 4 hours of sleep a night, and the cold, grinding momentum of a woman who had been lied to so thoroughly that uncovering the truth had become the only thing keeping her sane. She visited Evelina twice more during those weeks, always when Ronan was occupied. War councils, border briefings, the endless machinery of an empire at low-grade conflict. She went alone the second time against Marin's protests. She needed the girl to talk freely, and Marin's sword hand and scarred face did not exactly encourage casual conversation. The second visit, Evelina was calmer, still frightened, still pale, but there was a steadiness in her voice that had not been there before. She was sitting by the fire, reading a book of northern folk histories that Celine recognized from her own shelves. "You came back," Evelina said. She did not sound surprised. She sounded resigned. Celine sat in the chair across from her. "I told you I would. People in this palace say a lot of things." Celine let that land without responding. She studied the younger woman, the way her hand rested on her belly now with more weight than before, the dark circles under her eyes that mirrored Celine's own, the bitten-down fingernails and the raw skin around her cuticles where she had been picking at herself. "Tell me about Lucien," Celine said. Evelina's hand stilled on her belly. The fire crackled. Rain tapped the narrow window. "He is a good man," Evelina said quietly. "Good men do not send pregnant women 600 miles south and then hide behind military seals." Evelina's eyes flashed, the first real spark of defiance Celine had seen in her. He did not know. "When I left Ashmark, I did not know either. It was too early. I found out 3 weeks after I arrived in the capital. By then Ronan had already noticed me. By then I was already inside." "Inside what?" "This." Evelina gestured at the room. "The tower, the silk, the cage that smells like perfume." Celine leaned back. "When did you tell Lucien?" "I sent a letter through the courier, Brennan Holt. He has been carrying messages between us since the beginning." Evelina swallowed. "Lucien wanted to come south immediately. He wanted to take me back to the border, hide me in one of the outpost villages. I told him no, because by then Ronan believed the child was his, and if Lucien showed up demanding me back, Ronan would have killed us both. So you let the king believe a lie to keep yourself alive." "I let the king believe a lie to keep my child alive," Evelina said. Her voice broke on the word child, but she held Celine's gaze. "There is a difference." Celine looked at her for a long time. She thought about survival, what it cost, what it required, how it bent a person into shapes they would never have chosen if the world had given them any other option. She thought about her own survival, the 12 years of silence and compromise and swallowed rage that had kept her on the throne while better women would have walked away. She thought about how surviving often looked exactly like complicity, and how easy it was to hate someone for doing the thing you had done yourself. "Does Lucien know about the letters you have been hiding?" Celine asked. Evelina nodded. "He writes back, through Brennan. It is the only thing that has kept me." She stopped. Her throat worked. "Sane," she finished. "What does he say?" "That he is coming, that the winter moon banquet will bring him to the capital, and he will find a way to get me out before anyone discovers the truth." Celine felt her stomach drop. Lucien Varro, the man who commanded 30,000 soldiers along the northern border, the man Ronan called brother, was planning to extract a pregnant woman from the king's private tower during the most heavily guarded event of the year. It was either the bravest plan she had ever heard or the most catastrophically stupid. "He cannot do that," Celine said. "I know," Evelina whispered. If he tries to take you during the banquet, Ronan will treat it as treason, not just against the crown, against the blood bond. He will execute Lucien in front of every noble house in the empire, and he will be within his rights to do it. I know. And the child. Ronan will claim the child regardless. If he believes it is his, he will never let it go. You understand that. A king does not release what he considers an heir. Evelina's face crumpled. She pressed both hands against her belly and bent forward, and the sound that came out of her was the sound of a woman who had been holding a weight far too heavy for far too long. Then what do I do? She said. Tell me. Tell me what I am supposed to do. Because I have been in this room for 5 months, and every day the walls get smaller, and every night I dream about my baby being born in a place where the only light comes through a window the size of my hand, and I cannot. She was hyperventilating. Celine moved before she thought about it. Instinct, not strategy. She knelt in front of the chair and took Evelina's hands and held them. The girl's fingers were ice cold and shaking so badly that Celine could feel the tremors running up through her own wrists. Breathe, Celine said. Look at me. Breathe. Evelina looked at her, tear-streaked, snot-nosed pupils blown wide with panic. She breathed. Once, twice. The shaking slowed but did not stop. I'm going to tell you something, Celine said, still holding her hands, and I need you to hear it, because it is the most honest thing anyone in this palace has said to you in months. You are not getting out of this tower by running. Lucien cannot save you. Ronan will not free you. The only person who can end this is me, and I am going to. But you have to trust me. Why would I trust you? Evelina said. Her voice was thin as paper. You are his wife. Celine squeezed her hands. Because I am the only person in this empire who has less reason to lie to you than anyone else. He already took everything from me. There is nothing left to protect, and that makes me the most dangerous woman in this kingdom. Something passed between them, not friendship. It was too soon and too fractured for that, but recognition. The silent understanding of two women standing on opposite sides of the same wreckage, both realizing the man who put them there was not the one who would dig them out. I need your letters, Celine said. All of them. Every message Lucien sent, every message you wrote back. Evelina hesitated. If I am going to do this, Celine continued, I need to know exactly what Lucien knows, what he has planned, and what he is willing to do. Because I'm going to make sure his plan does not get everyone killed, including your baby. Evelina pulled her hands free. She stood, slowly, the weight of her belly shifting her center of gravity, and walked to the vanity. She knelt with difficulty, reached beneath the false bottom, and pulled out a bundle of letters tied with a strip of cloth torn from her nightgown. She held them against her chest for a moment. Then she held them out to Celine. He is not a traitor, Evelina said. He loves me. That is all this is. Celine took the letters. She tucked them inside her coat beside the transport manifest, and for one brief second she allowed herself to feel the weight of everything she was carrying, the paper, the secrets, the lives that depended on what she did next. Love, Celine said. Love is never all anything is. She left the tower. She read the letters that night in the armory with the door locked and a single candle burning. Marin sat across from her, sharpening a knife on a whetstone, the rhythmic scrape filling the silences between Celine's breathing. The letters were devastating. Lucien wrote with the blunt clarity of a soldier who had never learned to hide behind pretty language. His words were direct, urgent, and raw, with a desperation that bled through every line. He did not write like a man conducting a political affair. He wrote like a man in love with a woman he could not reach, carrying a child he could not protect, trapped in a situation that was tightening around both of them like a noose. He described his plan in the last 3 letters. He would arrive at the winter moon banquet with his personal guard, 12 men, handpicked, loyal only to him. He would attend the opening feast, maintain appearances, then slip away during the midnight toast when the court would be drunk and distracted. He would reach the West Tower through the same lower passage that Marin had discovered, take Evelina, and ride north before dawn. He had a safe house prepared in the mountain village of Greyvale, 70 miles north of the capital. From there, he would take her across the border into the free territories where Ronan's authority did not reach. It was detailed, it was well-timed, it was logistically sound, and it would fail. Celine knew it would fail because she understood something Lucien did not. Ronan had already tripled the palace guard for the banquet. She had seen the deployment orders herself, signed and sealed 3 weeks ago. Every gate, every passage, every corridor would be watched. The king was not just preparing for a celebration. He was preparing for a display of force, a reminder to every noble house that the Alpha Crown was secure and unchallengeable. Ronan was expecting trouble. Maybe not from Lucien specifically, but he was expecting something. A king who hid secrets was a king who feared exposure, and fear made men like Ronan quadruple the locks on every door. "He will die," Celine said, setting down the last letter. Marin looked up from her whetstone. "The commander? If he tries this, Ronan will catch him before he reaches the tower gate, and even if by some miracle he gets Evelina out, the roads north will be crawling with patrols. They will not make it 30 miles. So what do we do?" Celine stared at the letters spread across the table. She stared at the handwriting, the heavy strokes, the ink blots where the quill had pressed too hard, the places where a word had been scratched out and rewritten because a man 600 miles away was trying to find the right thing to say to a woman he might never see again. She thought about the winter moon banquet. 8 weeks. No, 6 now. 6 weeks until the entire power structure of the empire gathered under one roof, dressed in their finest, drinking Ceresian wine and pretending the world was not on fire. She thought about Ronan's face at the council table, the trembling hand, the cut knuckle, the way he flinched every time someone mentioned the West Tower in passing, even as a geographical reference. She thought about Evelina's hands on her belly. She thought about power, what it meant, who held it, and what happened when the person who held it realized they had been holding nothing but air. "We do not stop Lucien," Celine said. "We use him." Marin set down her knife. "Explain." "Lucien's plan fails because it relies on secrecy. But what if secrecy is exactly the wrong strategy? What if the only way to save Evelina, stop Ronan, and prevent the kind of bloodshed that tears an empire apart is to do the one thing nobody in this palace has the courage to do?" Marin waited. "Tell the truth," Celine said. "All of it. In front of everyone." The candle flickered. The knife lay still on the table. The letter sat between them like a bomb with a 6-week fuse. "You want to expose the king?" Marin said carefully, at his own banquet. "I want to expose the lie," Celine said. "There is a difference. Ronan built this secret because he believes the child is his heir. That belief is the foundation. Pull it out, and everything he has constructed, the tower, the deception, the obsession, collapses on its own. He will not need to be overthrown. He will need to be caught. And Lucien? Lucien will be in this room when it happens. He will have to answer for his part. But if I do this right, if the truth comes out publicly, in front of witnesses, with evidence that cannot be denied, Ronan cannot execute him quietly. He would have to hold a formal tribunal. And a tribunal buys time. Time for Evelina to be moved to safety. Time for the council to intervene. Time for the law to do what back-alley justice never can. Marin stared at her. "You're gambling the stability of the entire kingdom on Ronan choosing procedure over rage." Celine shook her head. "I am gambling on Ronan's pride. He has spent 12 years building the image of an unshakable king. When the truth comes out, his first instinct will not be to kill. His first instinct will be to control the narrative, to look strong, to show the court that he is still in command. And that instinct, that pause between rage and action, is where I live. That is where I do my work." Marin picked up her knife. She turned it over in her hand, studying the edge. "You know what happens if you are wrong," she said. "Yes. You lose the throne, the council, probably your life, and Evelina and the baby go down with you. Yes, and you are doing this anyway." Celine gathered the letters. She stacked them neatly, aligned the edges, and tied them back together with the strip of torn silk. She placed them inside her coat, over her heart, where she could feel the paper press against her ribs with every breath. "I have been wrong for 12 years, she said. "I was wrong about my marriage, wrong about my husband, wrong about the life I thought I was building inside these walls. Being wrong one more time does not scare me anymore. What scares me is spending the rest of my life knowing the truth and choosing to be silent." She blew out the candle. The darkness swallowed them both. The following week, Celine did something she had never done before. She requested a private audience with Lady Petra Hale. They met in the East Garden. Dead in winter, the hedges stripped bare, the fountain frozen solid in the center of the courtyard. It was the most exposed location in the palace, which was precisely why Celine chose it. No walls meant no ears, and the cold ensured no one lingered nearby longer than they had to. Lady Petra arrived in a fur-lined coat, her breath pluming in the gray air. She was 53, lean and hard-eyed, with silver streaked through black hair pulled tight against her skull. She had managed the empire's grain stores for 11 years and had survived 4 attempts to remove her from the position by lords who thought a woman had no business controlling the food supply. She survived because she understood a fundamental truth about power. The person who feeds the army is more important than the person who commands it. "Your Majesty," she said. She did not bow. Petra never bowed to anyone. It was one of the reasons Celine respected her. "Lady Petra, thank you for meeting me. You said it was urgent." Celine looked at the frozen fountain. The ice had cracked in the cold, sending fractures across the surface like veins in marble. She thought about how something could look solid and still be breaking apart from the inside. "How long have you known about the West Tower?" Celine said. Petra did not flinch. She did not blink. But something behind her eyes shifted, a recalculation, fast and precise. The same look she wore when grain shipments came in short, and she had to decide which provinces starved. "Define what you mean by the West Tower," Petra said. "You know exactly what I mean." Silence. The wind cut through the garden, biting exposed skin. Celine did not pull her coat tighter. She stood in the cold and let it hurt because the hurt was keeping her focused. Petra exhaled. 2 months, she said. "I noticed the fuel discrepancies before you did. I traced them to Theron's maintenance budget and decided it was not my concern." "Not your concern." "I serve the Empire's food supply, not the King's personal arrangements. Whatever he keeps in that tower is between him and whatever remains of his conscience." Celine turned to face her. "What if what he keeps in that tower could destabilize the succession?" Petra's eyes narrowed. The wind howled between them. Somewhere in the palace, a door slammed. "Then it becomes my concern," Petra said slowly, "because a succession crisis means civil conflict. Civil conflict means disrupted supply lines. Disrupted supply lines mean famine, and famine is my jurisdiction." "There is a woman in that tower," Celine said. "She is 8 months pregnant. Ronan believes the child is his heir." Petra's jaw tightened. "Is it?" "No." "How certain are you?" Celine held her gaze. "Certain enough to stake my throne on it at the winter moon banquet." The words landed between them like a blade driven into frozen ground. Petra stared at her for a long moment, measuring, calculating, running the numbers the way she always ran the numbers. "You are going to expose this publicly," Petra said. "Yes." "And you are telling me because you need the council on your side when the fallout hits." "I am telling you because you are the only council member who makes decisions based on math instead of loyalty. And the math on this is clear. If Ronan's false heir is born and legitimized, the Northern Lords will challenge the bloodline within a year. If the truth comes out privately, Ronan buries it and the problem festers. The only path that preserves stability is controlled exposure. In public. With witnesses." Petra looked at the frozen fountain for a very long time. Then she looked at Celine. "I will not help you," she said, "but I will not stop you. And when the banquet comes, I will be watching. If your evidence holds, you will have my voice on the council. If it does not," she paused, "I will pretend this conversation never happened." "Fair enough," Celine said. "One more thing," Petra said. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Marin told me about the letters." Celine went rigid. "Marin, she is my cousin. Blood runs thicker than orders, Your Majesty. I know about Commander Vero, and I know you think you can control what happens when 2 powerful men discover they have been played by the same woman. Evelina did not play anyone. She survived." Petra shrugged. "Survived. Played. The difference is academic when the swords come out. My advice, well, not that you asked, is to remember that Lucien Vero is not a man who breaks quietly. He is a border commander. When he is cornered, he fights. And if he fights in the middle of your carefully planned exposure, your controlled detonation becomes an uncontrolled massacre." She turned and walked back toward the palace without another word. Her boot prints cut clean lines through the frost. Celine stood alone in the dead garden with the wind biting her face and Petra's words rattling through her skull like stones in a tin cup. She thought about Lucien, a man she had met only a handful of times at formal events, a man who called her husband brother, a man who had managed to fall in love with the one woman on earth who could unravel an empire. She thought about his plan, the 12 loyal guards, the midnight extraction, Grey Veil. She thought about what Petra had said. When he is cornered, he fights. Celine needed Lucien Varro at the Winter Moon banquet. She needed him calm, visible, and controllable. She needed him to not do anything catastrophically heroic in the 12 hours between his arrival and her revelation, which meant she needed to contact him before he reached the capital. She needed to tell him about her plan, convince him to abandon his, and trust a woman he had never spoken to with the lives of the woman he loved and the child he had never met. She had 4 weeks to figure out how. She pressed her fingers against the letters hidden inside her coat. The paper was warm from her body heat now, soft at the edges where her sweat had dampened it. She thought about Lucien's handwriting, the heavy strokes, the blotted ink, the raw and ugly honesty of a man who did not know how to be anything other than what he was. She thought about Ronan's handwriting, neat, controlled, every letter precisely formed, the penmanship of a man who had learned very early that presentation was more important than content. 2 men, 2 hands, 2 entirely different ways of gripping the world, and Celine standing between them, holding the only thing that mattered more than either of their hearts. The truth. She looked up at the West Tower. From the garden, she could see the narrow window at the top, the one the size of a hand, the one Evelina stared through every day while the world outside went on without her. A light was burning behind it, small and warm and impossibly fragile against the vast gray sky. Celine turned toward the palace. She walked fast. She had letters to write and a courier to find and 6 weeks to turn a kingdom inside out without anyone seeing her hands move. Behind her, the light in the tower flickered. And somewhere on the northern border, 600 miles away, Commander Lucien Varro was already saddling his horse. He was not waiting for the banquet. He was coming now. Marin brought the news at dawn on a Tuesday, 4 weeks before the Winter Moon banquet, and she brought it the way she brought everything, without softening the blow. Lucien Varro crossed the River Ash 3 days ago, she said. He is traveling with 6 men, not 12. Moving fast. Off the main roads. At his current pace, he reaches the capital in 5 days. Celine was standing at the window of her study. She had not yet dressed. Her hair hung loose around her shoulders, and the dark circles under her eyes had deepened into bruises. She looked like a woman who had been fighting a war in her sleep. 5 days, she said. 5 days. That is 4 weeks early. Yes. She pressed her palm against the glass. The cold bit into her skin. Her breath fogged the pain and erased the view. The gray rooftops, the distant mountains, the West Tower standing like a rotten tooth against the morning sky. He could not wait, Celine said. She was not asking. She was confirming what she already knew. The letters had shown her who Lucien was. A man built from straight lines and blunt force. The kind of soldier who solved problems by moving toward them at speed. Patience was a language he had never learned. And the woman he loved was locked in a tower with a baby pressing against her ribs and a king's name stamped on her cage. Of course he could not wait. "How did you find out?" she asked. Marin leaned against the doorframe. The courier. "Brennan Holt. I have been paying him double what Lucy pays. He delivered the commander's last message to Evelina yesterday and a copy to me this morning." Celine turned. What did the message say? 3 words. "I am coming." Celine closed her eyes. Behind her lids she saw the map of the empire. Every road, every river crossing, every choke point between the northern border and the capital. She had memorized that map years ago, back when she still believed understanding geography was the same as understanding power. Now she understood that power had nothing to do with territory. Power was information. Power was timing. Power was knowing what someone was going to do before they did it, and positioning yourself in the space between intention and action. Lucien Varro was a lit fuse burning toward the capital, and if he reached the West Tower before Celine was ready, the explosion would not be controlled. It would be catastrophic. She opened her eyes. "Find Brennan Holt," she said. "I need to send a message to Lucien before he reaches the Outer Valley. Can you get a rider out today? Marin hesitated. Celine caught the hesitation the way she caught everything. Instantly, instinctively, like catching a blade mid-swing. What? Celine said. There is something else, Marin said. Her voice had changed. Lower, tighter. The voice she used when delivering information that would leave a mark. Tell me. Marin reached inside her coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She held it for a moment, as if weighing whether to hand it over or burn it. Then she handed it over. Celine unfolded it. It was a letter. Not Lucien's handwriting. She knew his heavy strokes by heart now. This was different, precise, small, written with the careful economy of someone trained to leave no wasted marks on a page. She read it. She read it again. The floor seemed to tilt beneath her feet. Not literally. The stone was as solid as it had been for 300 years. But something in her chest, something structural, load-bearing, the beam that held the rest of her together, cracked. She sat down. Not in the chair, on the floor. Her legs simply stopped holding her, and she sat on the cold stone with the letter in her hands and stared at the words until they blurred. Marin said nothing. She stood in the doorway and watched her queen sit on the floor and did not move, because she understood that some moments could not be helped. They could only be survived. The letter was from Theron Voss. It was addressed to Lucien Vero, and it described, in meticulous detail, every step of Celine's plan. The secret investigation, the evidence she had gathered from the ledgers, the letters she had taken from Evelina's hidden drawer, her meeting with Lady Petra in the frozen garden, the intended exposure at the winter moon banquet. Every piece of the architecture Celine had spent weeks constructing, laid bare in Theron's small, precise handwriting. The date on the letter was 6 days ago. Celine's hands were shaking. She pressed them flat against the floor, palms down on cold stone, and forced herself to breathe. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way she had taught herself after the second assassination attempt, when the poison needle had come close enough to scratch her collarbone, and she had spent 3 hours in a locked room teaching her body to stop trembling. How? She said. Her voice came out thin and cracked. How does Theron know? Marin stepped into the room. She closed the door. She locked it. I have been asking myself the same question for the last 2 hours, Marin said. Theron should not know about any of this. The only people who knew the full plan were you, me, and as of last week, Lady Petra. Petra, Celine whispered. Marin shook her head. I considered that, but Petra would not go to Theron. She has no relationship with the man, and betraying you to the king's steward gains her nothing. She is already positioned to benefit regardless of the outcome. Then how? Marin knelt beside her. She put one hand on the stone floor, the other on her knee, and brought her face level with Celine's. The armory, Marin said. Celine stared at her. We met in the armory, Marin continued, every time. We read the letters there. We discuss the plan there. You said it was safe because there were no windows, no servants' passages, and only one door. Yes. There is a vent, Marin said, behind the weapons rack on the north wall. A ventilation shaft that connects to the servants' corridor above the kitchens. I found it this morning when I went back to check. The grate was loose. Recently loosened struts. The screws had been backed out and replaced with wax plugs that look identical from 3 feet away. Celine felt the blood drain from her face. She felt it physically, a cold tide pulling away from her skin, leaving her pale and numb and hollow. Someone had been listening. Every conversation, every strategy session, every moment she and Marin had spent hunched over documents and letters and the careful skeleton of a plan that was supposed to save Evelina and preserve the kingdom. Someone had heard all of it, and that someone had carried it straight to Theron Voss, who had wrapped it in neat handwriting and sent it north to Lucien Varro. But not to Ronan. Celine's brain caught on that detail like a fishhook snagging flesh. Theron had sent the intelligence to Lucien, not to the king. Theron Voss, the man who had served Ronan since before the war, the man who said he answered to one voice and one voice alone, had chosen to warn the commander instead of his master. Why? Celine said. Marin met her eyes. That is the part that scares me. Celine got off the floor. She stood slowly, joints aching, and walked to the desk. She placed the letter flat on the surface and smoothed the creases with both hands. She stared at Theron's handwriting, the neat, controlled letters, the precise spacing, the absolute absence of emotion in every stroke. She thought about Theron, 50 years old, thin, quiet, the kind of man who moved through a room without disturbing the air. He had been at Ronan's side for 20 years, longer than Celine, longer than Lucien, longer than anyone currently alive in the palace. He knew every secret the king had ever buried. He had the keys to every locked door, the access to every restricted passage, the invisible authority that came from being so essential that he became part of the furniture. And furniture heard everything. Celine had always known Theron was dangerous. She had known it the way you know fire is hot. Theoretically, distantly, as a fact that does not require action until the flames are at your door. The flames were at her door. She sat down at the desk. She picked up a quill. She set it down again. She pressed her thumbs against her temples and closed her eyes and tried to think through the vertigo of realizing that the ground she had been standing on for weeks was not ground at all. It was a stage, and she had been performing for an audience she did not know existed. If Theron sent this to Lucien 6 days ago, she said, and Lucien left the border 3 days ago, then Lucien has read this letter. He knows my plan. He knows about the banquet exposure. He knows I have the letters and the evidence. Yes, Marin said, and he is coming anyway, faster than before, with fewer men. Yes, Celine opened her eyes. He is not coming to rescue Evelina, she said. Not anymore. He is coming because he thinks my plan will get her killed. He read Theron's letter and decided that a public exposure puts Evelina and the baby in more danger than his extraction plan. So he is accelerating. He is going to try to get her out before I can act. Marin sat in the chair across the desk. Her scarred face was tight with the kind of tension that precedes violence. That is one possibility, she said. What is the other? The other is that Theron did not send that letter to help Lucien. He sent it to draw him out, to accelerate exactly what is happening right now. Lucien charging south with a small force off the main roads, away from his army, exposed, vulnerable. A trap, Celine said. The word sat in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Think about it, Marin said. Theron has served Ronan for 20 years. His loyalty has never wavered, not once. And now, suddenly, he intercepts intelligence about the Queen's secret investigation and sends it to the king's rival instead of the king himself? That does not make sense. Unless the goal is not to inform Lucien, but to manipulate him, to make him do exactly what he is doing right now. Ride south alone, away from his 30,000 troops, into a situation where he can be captured or killed without triggering a military response. Celine felt the logics of it settle over her like ice water. It was clean. It was elegant. It was exactly the kind of move Theron would make. Not through force, but through information, through understanding how people worked and feeding them precisely the input that would produce the desired output. Lucien was not being warned. He was being herded. And if that was true, then Ronan knew. Maybe not about Celine's plan specifically, but about Lucy's chien, about the affair, about the letters. Maybe he had known for longer than anyone realized. Maybe the whole West Tower, the silk, the wine, the hidden chamber, was not a love nest, but a mousetrap. Bait designed to keep Evelina visible and Lucien reachable, while the king waited for the right moment to close the jaws. Celine felt sick. She felt the nausea rise from her stomach into her throat, and she swallowed it down with the mechanical discipline of a woman who had been swallowing things for 12 years. She looked at the letter again. She read it one more time, slower, parsing every sentence for the thing she had missed. And she found it. The last line. 5 words, written in the same precise hand, but slightly different. The pen had been pressed harder, the ink darker, as if Theron had paused before writing and then committed with more force than the rest of the letter required. The Queen is not ready. Celine stared at those words. She turned them over in her mind. She examined them from every angle, the way she would examine a stone pulled from a riverbed, looking for the vein of ore hidden inside. The Queen is not ready. It was a warning, but a warning to whom? If Theron was loyal to Ronan and the letter was bait, those words made no sense. You do not warn your prey about the trap. You do not tell the mouse that the cheese is poisoned, unless you want the mouse to stop, unless the warning was real. Unless Theron Voss, quiet, invisible, loyal Theron, was doing something far more complicated than anyone in this palace had given him credit for. Celine put the letter down. She looked at Marin. "I need to talk to Theron," she said. Marin's eyes widened. "Absolutely not. If he is working for Ronan, then Ronan already knows everything and nothing I do or do not do in the next 5 days matters. But if he is not, if Theron is operating on his own, then he is the only person in this palace who has access to both sides of the secret and has chosen not to give it to the king. Or he is playing a game none of us understand." Celine stood. "Then I need to understand it, because right now I have a border commander riding toward the capital with 6 soldiers and a death wish. A pregnant woman locked in a tower who does not know her lover is walking into a potential execution, and a plan that has been compromised from the inside before I could put the first piece in place. I am out of clean options, Marin. I have been out of clean options since the night I opened that gate and found a girl wearing my nightgown." She picked up the letter. She folded it. She put it in her coat. "Where is Theron right now?" she asked. Marin exhaled through her nose. She looked like she wanted to argue. She looked like she wanted to grab Celine by the shoulders and shake sense into her, the way soldiers shake sense into each other before a suicide charge. But she did not. Because she had served this woman for 9 years, and she knew the difference between recklessness and resolve, and what she saw in Celine's eyes right now was not a woman losing control. It was a woman who had already calculated the cost of every possible path and chosen the one that hurt the most, because it was the only one that led somewhere. "The kitchens," Marin said. "He supervises the evening meal preparation between the 5th and 6th bells." "Then I have 2 hours," Celine said. She walked to the door. She stopped. She turned back. "One more thing," she said. "Evelina. She does not know about any of this. Not about Lucien coming early, not about Theron's letter, not about the compromise plan. No, keep it that way. She has enough fear in that room already. I will not add mine." Celine found Theron Voss in the lower kitchens at the 5th bell, exactly where Marin said he would be. He was standing at the far end of the preparation table reviewing a handwritten menu for the week's evening meals, his thin frame draped in the dark, formal coat he wore like a second skin. His hands were folded behind his back. His posture was impeccable, the posture of a man who had spent 2 decades making himself essential by being perfectly still while the world moved around him. Celine dismissed the 2 kitchen maids with a nod. They scurried out without question. The queen rarely visited the kitchens, but when she did, people moved. The room was warm and smelled of roasting fat and rosemary. Copper pots hung from the ceiling beams. A fire crackled in the massive stone hearth at the center of the room, where a whole boar turned slowly on a spit, its skin blistering and popping. Theron looked up. If he was surprised to see her, his face betrayed nothing. It never did. The man had the emotional range of a closed door. "Your Majesty," he said. His voice was thin and precise, each word placed like a pin in fabric. "Theron." Celine closed the kitchen door behind her. The heavy oak muffled the corridor noise. They were alone. "We need to talk about the letter you sent to Commander Vero 6 days ago." She watched his face. She watched it the way a hawk watches a field. Not blinking, not breathing, waiting for the slightest tremor of motion that would reveal what was hiding beneath the surface. Theron did not move. He did not blink. He stood with his hands behind his back and his spine straight and looked at her with those flat gray eyes, and Celine realized with a cold shock that he had been expecting this. He had been waiting for it. "I wondered how long it would take," he said. Celine felt her pulse spike. She controlled it. She kept her voice level. "Explain," she said. Theron set down the menu. He smoothed it flat on the table with both palms, a gesture that was almost ritualistic, as if he needed his hands to be doing something precise before his mouth could form the words. "I have served this house for 20 years, he said. "I have watched 3 kings in my lifetime. 2 were cruel. 1 was merely weak. Ronan is neither. Ronan is something worse. He is a man who believes his own mythology. He has convinced himself that every decision he makes is correct because he is the one making it. That kind of certainty does not bend. It shatters. And when it shatters, everyone standing nearby bleeds." Celine said nothing. She let him talk. She had learned long ago that silence was the most effective interrogation technique. Most people could not stand the weight of it and would fill the emptiness with truth. "I brought Evelina to this tower because he ordered it," Theron continued. "I arranged the room, the physician, the supply chain. I did everything he asked because that is what I have always done. But 9 weeks ago, I realized something that changed my understanding of the situation entirely. What did you realize? Theron looked at her. For the first time, something moved behind those flat gray eyes. Not emotion exactly, but the shadow of something that might once have been emotion before 20 years of service had ground it down to dust. The child is not his, Theron said. Celine felt the air leave her lungs. She had known this. She had heard it from Evelina herself. But hearing it from Theron, from the man who had built the cage, who had carried the meals and the wine and the messages, who had maintained the architecture of this lie day after day, was different. It was confirmation from inside the machine. How do you know? She said. I manage the king's calendar. Every meeting, every absence, every private hour. I know where he is at every moment of every day, and I know that during the window when this child was conceived, Ronan was not in the capital. He was at the southern garrison for 12 days. He did not return until after Evelina was already showing. Celine stared at him. 12 days. 12 days. The dates do not align. They never did. But Ronan did not check. He saw a beautiful young woman telling him what he wanted to hear, and he believed it because believing it made him feel like a man instead of a king, and those are not the same thing, no matter how badly he needs them to be. The fire crackled. The boar turned on its spit. Fat dripped into the flames and hissed. If you have known for 9 weeks, Celine said, why did you not tell the king? Theron's jaw tightened. It was the smallest movement, a fraction of a millimeter, but on a face that never moved, it was seismic. Because I've watched this man for 20 years, Theron said. I know what he does when the world contradicts his beliefs. He does not adjust. He destroys the contradiction. If I had told him the child was not his, he would not have let Evelina go. He would have killed her. Quietly, in the night, in that tower. And the child with her. And then he would have sealed the room and told himself it never happened, the way he tells himself everything uncomfortable never happened. I have watched him do it before. Not with women, with truths. And a man who can bury a truth will eventually bury a person. Celine felt something shift inside her. Not the sharp crack she had felt reading the letter, but something slower. A tectonic movement. The deep grinding of 2 plates of understanding pressing against each other until the landscape above them changed permanently. Theron was not loyal to Ronan. He was not disloyal either. He was something more dangerous than both. He was a man who had served power so long that he had developed his own relationship with it. Independent, strategic, untethered to any single master. He served the system, not the man. And when the man became a threat to the system, Theron's allegiance shifted like water finding a new channel. You sent the letter to Lucien to pull him south, Celine said. Why? Because Commander Varro is the only person in this empire with enough military force to counterbalance the king if things go wrong. But his army is useless if it is 600 miles north. I needed him closer, not in the capital side. That would be too obvious. But close enough that if your plan at the banquet triggers a violent response from Ronan, there is a credible threat of military intervention within days. You were positioning him. I was creating options. For all of us. Celine felt the ground beneath her shift again. She had walked into this kitchen expecting to confront a traitor and instead found a strategist operating on a level she had not anticipated. Theron had not sabotaged her plan. He had adapted to it. He had taken the intelligence he gathered through the ventilation shaft, information he was never meant to have, and used it not to destroy her position, but to reinforce it from an angle she could not see. It was brilliant. It was also terrifying, because a man capable of this kind of independent calculation was a man who would always be 3 moves ahead, and you could never be entirely sure whose side of the board he was playing. The warning in your letter, Celine said. The queen is not ready. That was for Lucien. Yes, to slow him down, to make him think. Lucien Varro is a hammer. Every problem looks like a nail. I needed him to consider the possibility that charging into the capital with 6 men was not heroism. It was suicide. I needed him to hesitate long enough for you to make contact and fold him into your strategy. Instead, he read the letter and accelerated. Because you underestimated him. Because I underestimated what love does to an otherwise rational man, Theron said. His voice carried the faintest edge of something that might have been bitterness. It was the most human sound Celine had ever heard him make. I have spent 20 years watching Ronan make decisions based on desire instead of logic. I assumed the commander would be different. I was wrong. Celine looked at the fire. The boar was charring on one side, the skin blackening and splitting. Nobody was there to turn it. Nobody was there to do the small, invisible work that kept things from burning. "What does Ronan know?" she asked. Theron was quiet for a moment. Then, "He knows something is wrong. He does not know what. He has been sleeping in the war room for the past week, surrounded by maps and deployment orders. He has increased the palace guard. He has ordered Evelina moved to a second location within the tower, a deeper chamber, more secure. He is afraid, Your Majesty. But he does not know what he is afraid of. And a frightened king with no target is more dangerous than a furious one with a clear enemy." Celine absorbed this. She felt the information settle into the architecture of her plan, filling cracks she had not known existed. Ronan was afraid. Good. Fear could be shaped. Fear could be directed. A frightened man was a man looking for reassurance, and reassurance was a lever. "I need 3 things from you," Celine said. She turned to face Theron directly. She squared her shoulders. She lifted her chin. She became, in that moment, not a wife or a victim or a woman who had been crying on her study floor 2 hours ago, but a queen. "First," she said, "I need you to get a message to Lucian before he reaches the Outer Valley. Not through Brennan Holt, through your own channels. Tell him to stop. Tell him to hold position at Greyvale and wait for my word. Can you do that?" "I can." "Second, I need you to move Evelina's delivery to a safer location. The tower is compromised. Too many people know about it now. Find a place within the keep that is secure, accessible only through routes you control, and prepare it for a birth that could come within the next 4 to 6 weeks. The physician, Dr. Wren, will need access." Theron nodded once. "Third," Celine paused. She breathed. She felt the weight of what she was about to say pressing down on her like a physical force. "I need you to tell me every secret Ronan has buried in the last 20 years. Not the ones I already know about. The ones nobody knows. The ones that keep you loyal because knowing them makes you too dangerous to dismiss." Theron's eyes met hers. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The fire crackled. The fat hissed. The charring boar filled the kitchen with the smell of something burning past the point of saving. "That is a dangerous request," Theron said. "We are past safe requests. If I tell you what I know, there is no going back. For either of us. You will carry information that makes you a target for every power in this empire, including the one currently sleeping in the war room 30 feet above our heads." Celine held his gaze. She did not blink. She did not breathe. She stood in the heat of the kitchen with the smell of burning meat in her nostrils and the sound of her own heartbeat in her ears, and she held that gaze the way a woman holds a blade, steady, certain, and ready to cut. "I have been a target since the night I opened the tower gate," she said. "The only difference between then and now is that I know it." Theron studied her for what felt like an age. Then he reached behind his back and unfolded his hands. In his right hand, the hand that had been hidden behind his body for the entire conversation, he held a small leather-bound book, dark brown, worn at the edges, no larger than a man's palm. He placed it on the table between them. 20 years, he said. Every transaction, every order, every death that was not natural, and every fortune that was not earned. Dates, names, amounts, written in a cipher that only I can read. But I will teach you. Celine looked at the book. It sat on the kitchen table between a handwritten menu and a copper ladle, and it looked like nothing. A journal, a recipe collection, a merchant's pocket ledger. But the weight of it was enormous. She could feel it in the air the way you feel pressure before a storm. She reached for it. She stopped. "Why?" she said. "Why are you giving me this? 20 years of loyalty to one man, and you are handing his secrets to his wife in a kitchen that smells like burnt pork. Why now? Why me?" Theron looked at the fire. The boar was ruined now, black on both sides, the meat curling away from the bone, the fat hardened into dark pools in the drip tray. He stared at it with the flat attention of a man watching something inevitable complete itself. "Because in 20 years," he said, "you are the first person in this palace who asked me a question and actually waited for the answer." He picked up the menu, he folded it, he slid it into his coat pocket. Then he walked out of the kitchen without looking back, and the door swung shut behind him, and Celine stood alone in the heat and the smoke and the smell of something that had been left on the fire too long. She picked up the book. She held it against her chest. She could feel her heart beating against the leather cover, and for one disorienting second she could not tell which pulse was hers and which belonged to the 20 years of buried truth pressed against her ribs. She left the kitchen through the back corridor and walked to the armory. She locked the door. She found the vent behind the weapons rack, exactly where Marin said it would be, and stuffed it with wadded cloth until no air moved through it. Then she sat at the table and opened the book. The cipher was dense. Numbers and symbols, arranged in tight columns, cross-referenced with dates in a calendar system she did not recognize. It would take days to decode without Theron's help. But some entries were partially readable, names she recognized, dates that corresponded to events she remembered. And next to each one, a single symbol, a small mark in the margin that she could not yet interpret, but that appeared with disturbing frequency beside the names of people who were no longer alive. She closed the book. She pressed her fingers against her eyelids and breathed and felt the architecture of everything she thought she knew about her kingdom reshape itself into something uglier and more honest. She had walked into this crisis believing it was about a cheating husband and a hidden mistress. Then she had believed it was about a love affair and a mislabeled heir. Then she had believed it was about power and positioning and the careful manipulation of information. Now she understood it was about none of those things. It was about a system, a machine built from lies and maintained by people who had, each for their own reasons, decided that the truth was too expensive to speak aloud. Ronan was a part of that machine. Evelina was a part. Lucienne was a part. Theron was a part. And Celine, who had spent 12 years managing ledgers and trade agreements and pretending the cracks in the walls were just cosmetic, Celine was the biggest part of all. She had not been deceived. She had been complicit. Every time she ignored the signs, every time she accepted an easy answer, every time she chose the comfort of not knowing over the agony of finding out, she had added another brick to the wall that kept the truth imprisoned. And now the wall was coming down, not because she was tearing it apart, but because it had grown so tall and so heavy that the foundation could no longer hold it. The collapse was not a choice. It was physics. Marin knocked on the door. Celine opened it. "The writer is ready," Marin said. "What do you want to send to Lucienne?" Celine thought about it. She thought about the commander riding south through frozen back roads with 6 men and a death wish, and a love so fierce it had blinded him to every trap between here and the border. She thought about Evelina in the tower, pressing her hand against a window the size of her palm, waiting for a man who might arrive in chains. She thought about Ronan pacing the war room, surrounded by maps of an empire he was losing from the inside. She thought about Theron's book, heavy in her coat, full of secrets she was not yet equipped to understand. She thought about the woman she had been 4 weeks ago, a queen who believed she could control the outcome, manage the revelation, engineer a clean solution from the wreckage of someone else's lies. That woman was gone. "Tell him to come," Celine said. Marin blinked. "I thought you wanted him to wait at Greyvale. I changed my mind. Tell him to come to the capital. Not to the palace, to the lower city. The merchant quarter. There is a boarding house on Ashwell Street called the Iron Moth. Tell him to take a room under the name Dane and wait for me. You are going to meet him yourself." "Yes." "You cannot leave the palace without an escort. Ronan will notice. Then make sure Ronan does not notice." Celine held her gaze. 4 weeks until the banquet, Marin. I do not have the luxury of caution anymore. I have a compromise plan. A lover who will not stay put, a king's steward who just handed me 20 years of buried bodies, and 4 weeks to rebuild a strategy from nothing. The only way forward is faster. And if Lucian is not what you think he is? If Theron is playing both sides? If this entire situation is a net designed to catch you the moment you step outside these walls? Celine touched the book through her coat. She felt the leather against her palm. She felt the weight of every name written inside it. Every person who had trusted the wrong ally, made the wrong move, spoken the wrong truth at the wrong time. "Then I will be exactly where I have always been," she said, "surrounded by liars, making the best decision I can with the information I have. The only difference is I'm done pretending the liars are on my side." She stepped past Marin into the corridor. The torch nearest her had gone out. The darkness closed around her like a second skin, and she walked through it with her hands at her sides and her spine straight, and Theron's book pressed against her heart, and the sound of her own breathing echoing off the walls of a palace that had never, not once in 12 years, been her home. It had always been a cage. The only thing that had changed was that now she could see the bars. And in 4 weeks she was going to break every last one of them, or they were going to break her. There was no middle ground left. There was no compromise. There was no version of this story where everyone walked away whole. She was no longer a queen playing politics. She was a woman burning her own house down to see what survived the fire. And the fire, she knew, was already lit. Lucien Varro arrived in the capital 11 days before the Winter Moon banquet, and he arrived wrong. Celine had told him the Iron Moth. She had told him Ashwell Street. She had told him to use the name Dane and to wait. Instead, Marin woke her at 3 in the morning with blood on her hands and panic in her eyes. The first time in 9 years Celine had seen anything close to panic on that scarred face, and said, "He is in the lower stables." He rode straight through the eastern checkpoint using his real name and his military seal. The gate captain recognized him. "Ronan will know by sunrise." Celine was out of bed before Marin finished the sentence. She pulled on a coat over her nightgown, shoved her bare feet into boots, and followed Marin through the servants' corridor with her hair tangled and her pulse slamming against her eardrums like a fist on a locked door. The lower stables sat beneath the eastern wing, carved into the bedrock of the keep. The air down there was thick with the smell of horse sweat and wet hay, and something coppery that Celine identified before she saw its source. Blood. Fresh. Smeared on the stone floor in a trail that led from the stable entrance to a stall in the far corner. Lucien was sitting on the ground with his back against the wooden partition. His armor was gone, stripped somewhere on the road, and he wore a torn leather jerkin over a shirt that had once been white and was now the color of rust. His left arm hung at an angle that made Celine's stomach lurch. Dislocated. Maybe broken. His face was a map of violence. Split lip, swollen eye, a gash across his forehead that had bled down the right side of his face and dried in a dark crust along his jaw. He looked up when they entered. His one good eye focused on Celine, and what she saw in it was not pain or fear or the sheepish recognition of a man who had ignored every instruction she had given him. It was fury, the deep, slow-burning fury of a man who had been fighting his way south for 11 days through terrain that was trying to kill him and had arrived to find that the world was still exactly as broken as when he left. 2 of his 6 men stood behind him. The others were gone. Celine did not ask where. The answer was written in the blood on the stable floor and the haunted silence of the 2 soldiers who remained. "You were supposed to go to Ashwell Street," Celine said. Lucien spat blood onto the hay. His voice came out thick, damaged, pushed through a throat that sounded like it had been screaming for days. "Ashwell Street burned 2 nights ago. Your boarding house is ash. Somebody knew I was coming." The words hit Celine like cold water. She looked at Marin. Marin's face confirmed what her gut already knew. She had not heard about the fire, which meant it had been set quietly, cleaned up quickly, erased from the city's attention before it could become a question anyone asked. Somebody had intercepted the plan. Again. Celine knelt in front of Lucien. She studied his injuries with the clinical detachment she had taught herself years ago, the same way she studied ledgers and supply chains, categorizing damage, assessing what was salvageable, what was not. His arm needed setting. The head wound needed cleaning. He was dehydrated. She could see it in the cracked skin of his lips and the sunken hollows around his eyes. But underneath the wreckage, the man was solid. Broad through the chest and shoulders, thick-necked, heavy-handed. He was built the way border commanders were built, not for elegance, but for endurance, a body designed to absorb punishment and keep moving forward. "How many did you lose?" she said. 4. His jaw worked. Ambush at the Greyvale crossing, 12 men in the trees, professional, not bandits. Military formation. They knew the route. Who sent them? Lucien's good eye locked onto hers. "You tell me. You are the one running the intelligence operation. I am just the fool who trusted your plan to keep us alive long enough to reach the city." Celine held his gaze. She did not flinch. She did not apologize. An apology would have been an insult to the 4 men who had died on a frozen road because someone inside her network had been feeding information to the wrong people. She thought about Theron's book, hidden in the false bottom of her desk drawer. She thought about the cipher she had been decoding night after night, the names and dates slowly resolving into a pattern that looked less like a king's record and more like a warlord's ledger. She thought about the 5 entries she had decoded so far. 5 names, 5 dates, 5 deaths that had been recorded as accidents or illness or simple bad luck, each one corresponding to a person who had threatened Ronan's authority at a critical moment. She thought about the ambush at Greyvale and wondered which column in Theron's book it would fill. "Can you walk?" she said. Lucien grunted. He pushed himself up the wall with his good arm, his jaw clamped shut, the tendons in his neck standing out like cables. His 2 remaining men moved to help him. He waved them off. He stood on his own feet, swaying slightly, and looked down at Celine from a height that made her realize why Ronan called this man brother. They were the same kind of animal, large, stubborn, dangerous. The difference was in the eyes. Ronan's eyes were calculating. Lucien's were direct. He looked at the world the way a man looks at a wall he intends to walk through. "Take me to her," he said. "Not yet," Celine said. Something moved behind his damaged face. Not anger, something more volatile. Desperation compressed into a space too small to hold it. "I did not ride 600 miles and bury 4 of my men to stand in a stable and wait," he said. His voice was low and raw and trembling with the effort of not shouting. "Take me to Evelina, now." Celine stood her ground. She was a foot shorter than him and unarmed and wearing a nightgown under her coat, and she stood her ground because she had learned something in the last 4 weeks that Lucien had not yet figured out. That the most dangerous thing in this palace was not a sword or a king or a military ambush. It was information, and right now she had more of it than anyone. "If you go to that tower tonight," she said, "you will be dead by morning. Ronan has tripled the guard. The passages are watched, and someone inside this palace, someone with access to both my communications and yours, has been systematically burning every escape route we planned. The boarding house on Ashwell Street did not catch fire by accident. Your ambush at Greyvale was not random. We have a leak, Commander, and until I know where it is, moving on the tower is a death sentence for you, for Evelina, and for your child." Lucien stared at her. The fury in his eye did not diminish, but something else entered it. The cold, reluctant recognition of a soldier who has been given tactical information that contradicts his preferred course of action and knows, in the part of his brain that is not governed by his heart, that the information is correct. He breathed. Once. Twice. His broken ribs made a sound like wet wood cracking. "Where?" he said. Celine turned to Marin. "The armory. Same as before. But seal every vent, every crack, every gap in the stone wide enough to fit a finger through. We trust nothing." Marin nodded. She moved. Lucien's 2 soldiers fell into step behind them, and the 5 of them crossed the lower stables and entered the servants' passage like a funeral procession, silent, grim, and moving toward something that none of them were sure they would survive. They reached the armory. Marin sealed the room, physically, this time, stuffing every opening with rags and wax, running her hands along every stone joint, checking the ceiling, the floor, the gaps beneath the door. When she was satisfied, she positioned herself outside with Lucien's 2 men and closed the door. Celine and Lucien were alone. He sat in the chair across the table and cradled his broken arm against his chest. The pain was visible in every line of his body. The tightness in his shoulders, the shallow breathing, the way his good hand gripped the edge of the table until the wood creaked. But he did not ask for help. Men like Lucien did not ask. They endured until they could not, and then they endured some more, because asking was a form of surrender, and surrender was the one language they had never learned. Celine poured water from a clay jug and pushed it across the table. "Drink," she said. "Then talk." He drank. Long and desperate, water running down his chin and dripping onto his ruined shirt. When he set the cup down, his hand was shaking. "I got your message," he said, "through Theron's channel. I was supposed to hold at Greyvale, but you did not hold. I held for 2 days. Then Brennan Holt showed up at my camp with a letter from Evelina. She said the king had moved her to a deeper chamber. She said the walls were closing in. She said she was afraid the baby was coming early, and there was no one in that tower who would help her if something went wrong." Celine closed her eyes. Evelina's letter. Sent through the same courier network that had already been compromised. The same courier who was being paid by Marin, by Lucien, and possibly by whoever had arranged the Greyvale ambush. Brennan Holt was either the most popular courier in the Empire or the most dangerous. Did she write anything else? Celine asked. Lucien reached inside his jerkin with his good hand. He winced, a sharp, involuntary sound, and pulled out a folded piece of paper, creased and stained with what might have been sweat or tears or both. She wrote this, he said. He held it out. Read it. Celine took the letter. She unfolded it carefully. Evelina's handwriting was different from what she remembered. Shakier, the letters pressed harder into the paper, the lines tilting downward as if gravity had increased since the last time she held a quill. The letter was short, 5 lines. Celine read them and felt the blood in her veins turn to something slower and colder than blood. She set the letter on the table. She smoothed it flat. She read it again because the first time had not been enough to convince her brain that the words were real. She says Theron told her about the ambush, Celine said. Her voice was very quiet. She says Theron told her 4 of your men were killed. She says Theron told her you were injured and might not survive the ride south. And she says... Celine paused. She breathed. She felt the implications reorganize themselves inside her skull like a building collapsing floor by floor. She says Theron told her these things 3 days before the ambush happened. The room went silent. Lucien's good eye was fixed on her face. He was not breathing. Neither was she. 3 days before, Celine repeated. Theron told Evelina about your casualties 3 days before you were attacked at Greyvale. Yeah, Lucien said. His voice was a blade. That is what I figured too. Celine stood. She walked to the wall. She pressed both palms flat against the cold stone and leaned her weight into it and felt the solidity of something that could not lie, could not scheme, could not rearrange itself to serve a hidden agenda. Theron had known about the ambush because Theron had arranged the ambush. The realization did not arrive like lightning. It arrived like dawn, slow, gray, inevitable. The light spreading across a landscape she had been walking through in the dark, revealing shapes she had been stumbling over for weeks without recognizing what they were. Theron's letter to Lucien, not a warning, a lure, designed to pull the commander south onto a specific road at a specific time into the path of 12 soldiers waiting in the trees. Theron's book of secrets, not a gift, a chain. Every page Celine decoded tied her deeper into a web of knowledge that made her complicit. If the information in that book ever became public, Celine's fingerprints would be all over it. She would look not like a whistleblower, but like a co-conspirator who had known about buried deaths for weeks and said nothing. Theron's conversation in the kitchen, the careful vulnerability, the confession about the child's paternity, the quiet, devastating admission that he had served Ronan for 20 years and chosen, finally, to serve the truth instead. Every word calibrated to build trust. Every sentence a brick in a wall designed to keep Celine looking in the wrong direction while the real architecture assembled itself around her. She had been played, not by Ronan, not by Evelina, not by Lucien, by the man who carried the trays. She turned from the wall. Her face was white. Her hands were steady. There was a moment, a single, crystalline second, where the woman she had been before this night and the woman she was becoming afterward existed in the same body, and she felt the seam between them like a fault line running through her center. Then the old woman stepped back, and the new one stepped forward. "We have been wrong about everything," she said. Her voice did not shake. It was the voice of someone who had passed through the worst of the pain and come out the other side into the cold, clear territory of pure calculation. Theron is not helping us. He is not helping Ronan. He is helping himself. He has spent 20 years building a network of secrets that makes him indispensable to whoever sits on the throne. And right now, he is engineering a situation where the current king destroys himself. The queen destroys her credibility, and the only person left standing with clean hands and valuable information is a steward who has never held a sword in his life. Lucien processed this. She watched it happen, the soldier's brain catching up to the spy's revelation, the anger rearranging itself around a new target. He set up the ambush, Lucien said. He set up the ambush. He burned the boarding house. He fed intelligence to both sides to keep us moving in directions that served his timeline, not ours. And he gave me a book full of evidence that will make me look guilty if it ever surfaces. Then I kill him, Lucien said. The words came out flat. Simple. The solution of a man who had spent his life in a world where problems could be ended with a blade. No, Celine said. No? Killing Theron solves nothing. The book still exists. The compromised courier still exists. The ambush at Greyvale has already happened, and 4 of your men are already dead, and nothing we do to one man in a dark corridor changes any of that. What we need is to understand what Theron actually wants, because men like him do not accumulate 20 years of secrets for power. Power is a side effect. They do it for survival. And if we can figure out what is threatening his survival, we can figure out why he is dismantling ours. Lucian's jaw was clenched so tight, the muscles in his face were trembling. His broken arm was swelling, the skin purpling beneath the torn sleeve. He needed a physician. He needed rest. He needed to not be sitting in a sealed armory beneath a hostile palace, having a strategic conversation with a woman he had met for the first time 90 minutes ago. But he stayed. Because underneath the fury and the pain and the animal desperation to reach the woman carrying his child, Lucien Varro understood something that most soldiers never learned. That the battlefield was not always where the swords were. Sometimes the battlefield was a table in a quiet room where 2 people decided what the truth was going to be. "What do you need from me?" he said. Celine sat down across from him. She looked at his ruined face, his broken arm, his blood-stained clothes. She looked at the letter from Evelina still lying on the table between them. She thought about what it meant to trust a man she did not know with a plan she had not yet built for a future she could not yet see. "I need you to disappear," she said. Lucien blinked. "Not from the capital. From sight. Marin will move you to a safe location. You stay there. You do not contact Evelina. You do not contact your men. You do not go near the tower. You do not exist until the night of the winter moon banquet. And then what? And then you walk into that banquet hall in front of every noble house in the empire, and you stand beside me while I burn this lie to the ground." She held out her hand, not for a handshake, for something older, a grip, the way soldiers sealed a pact before a battle they did not expect to survive. Lucien looked at her hand. He looked at her face. He looked at the door behind her, beyond which Marin stood guard in a corridor that led to a palace that held a tower that held a woman who held his child. He took her hand. His grip was rough and hot and shaking and strong enough to crush bone. "Swear to me she will be safe," he said. Celine squeezed back. She matched his pressure. She did not flinch. "I will do something better than swear," she said. "I will make it true." They released. Celine stood. She gathered Evelina's letter and folded it into her coat beside Theron's book, which she now understood was not a weapon she had been given, but a cage she had been locked inside. She would need to neutralize it. She would need to find a way to account for the information without being destroyed by it. She would need to become the kind of woman who could hold a live explosive in her hands and carry it across a room full of people without anyone noticing the fuse was burning. She had 11 days to become that woman. She opened the armory door. Marin looked at her. Lucien's 2 soldiers looked at her. The corridor stretched in both directions, dark and cold and full of the invisible machinery of a palace that had been running on secrets for longer than anyone alive could remember. "Move him," Celine told Marin. "Somewhere Theron cannot find." "Where?" Celine thought. She cycled through every location in the palace, every safe house in the city, every forgotten room and sealed corridor she had catalogued in 12 years of managing the keep's logistics. And then she thought of a place so obvious, so exposed, that no one looking for a hidden man would ever think to search it. "My chambers," she said. Marin stared at her. Your Majesty, my private chambers. The inner room behind the study. Ronan has not entered that wing in 14 months. The servants know not to disturb me past the 8th bell, and Theron has no reason to access the Queen's personal quarters. He manages the King's household, not mine. If anyone finds out, then we will have bigger problems than a commander sleeping behind the Queen's study, Celine said. Move him, now, before the dawn shift changes and the lower stables become visible. Marin moved. The soldiers moved. Lucien moved, slowly, painfully, one arm cradled against his ribs, his battered face set in the hard mask of a man who had decided to trust someone against every instinct in his body. Celine watched them go. Then she turned in the opposite direction and walked toward the West Tower. She reached the iron gate at the same moment the first gray light of dawn began to seep through the narrow windows of the upper corridor. She unlocked it with the key Marin had copied 3 weeks ago and pushed it open. Evelina was awake. She was standing in the center of the room with both hands pressed against her belly and her eyes wide and wild and fixed on the door as if she had been waiting for hours, as if she had sensed through the stone and the iron and the cold morning air that something fundamental had shifted in the world outside her cage. "Is he alive?" Evelina said. No greeting, no preamble, just the question that had been eating her alive. "He is alive," Celine said. "He is injured, but alive. He is in the capital." Evelina's knees buckled. She caught herself on the edge of the chair, both hands gripping the wood, her body folding around the weight of her belly like a bowstring released from tension. The sound she made was not crying. It was release, the violent, physical expulsion of a terror she had been holding in her chest for days. Celine let her breathe. She stood in the doorway and waited and watched the candlelight move across the walls of the tower room and thought about what she had come here to do. She had come to tell Evelina about Theron, about the ambush, about the burned boarding house and the compromised communications, and the 20 years of buried secrets sitting in a leather-bound book inside her coat. But looking at this woman, 9 months pregnant, alone, terrified, gripping a chair in a tower room because the man she loved was bleeding somewhere in the city below, Celine realized that the truth she carried was not a gift. It was a weapon. And the question was not whether to use it, but when, and against whom, and at what cost. Evelina straightened. She wiped her face. She looked at Celine with those wet chestnut eyes and said, "When can I see him?" "Not yet," Celine said. "When?" "After the banquet." 11 days. Something fractured behind Evelina's face. Not anger, not defiance. Something deeper and more dangerous. The quiet, lethal resignation of a woman who had been promised soon by too many people for too many months and was running out of the capacity to believe it. "You said you would end this," Evelina said. Her voice was flat, depleted. "You said you were the only person who could." "I am," Celine said. "Then why am I still in this room?" Celine crossed the chamber. She sat in the chair across from Evelina and leaned forward until their faces were close enough that she could see the broken blood vessels in the younger woman's eyes, and the dry, cracked skin at the corners of her mouth, and the faint tremor in her lower lip that she was fighting to control. "Because the man who built this room is not who we thought he was," Celine said. "And the plan I made to get you out of it was built on a foundation he laid, which means the plan is compromised, which means I need to build a new one. And I need 11 days to do it." Evelina stared at her. Who? Who are you talking about?" Celine hesitated. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down. Tell her now and risk her panicking, risk her acting on the information in ways that could not be controlled, or withhold it and add one more lie to the pile of lies already suffocating them both. She chose the middle path, the path of partial truth, which was the only currency this palace dealt in. "Someone inside the palace has been feeding information to both sides," Celine said. "They arranged the ambush that nearly killed Lucian. They burned the safe house we had prepared for your escape, and they are still operating inside the walls of this keep. I do not yet know their full motive, but I know enough to understand that the plan we had is dead. I am building a new one, and for it to work, you need to stay exactly where you are, do exactly what you have been doing, and trust no one who comes through that gate except me or Marin." Evelina was quiet. Her hands were on her belly. The baby moved. Celine could see it, the visible ripple of a limb pressing against the stretched skin beneath the silk gown. "Theron," Evelina said. Celine went still. "It is Theron," Evelina repeated. Her voice carried no surprise, no shock. Just the dull, heavy certainty of a woman confirming something she had suspected for a long time. Celine studied her face. "How long have you known?" "I did not know," Evelina said. "But I watched. He brings the food. He brings the messages. He changes the candles and checks the fire and adjusts the curtains, and every time he does, his eyes move. Not to me. To the room. He is always looking at the room, counting things, checking positions, the way a man checks a trap he has set, making sure every piece is still in place." Celine sat back. She felt the sharp, absurd irony of it, that the woman locked in the tower, the one everyone was trying to save, the one dismissed as a frightened girl caught between powerful men, had been observing her captor with more clarity than anyone on the outside. Survival sharpened the senses. It stripped away the comfortable illusions that free people carried and left nothing but the raw nerve of awareness. Evelina had been surviving in this room for 9 months. She had learned to read every footstep, every tone of voice, every shift in the air currents when the gate opened. She had turned her prison into a watchtower. "What else have you noticed?" Celine said. "He is afraid of the king," Evelina said. "Not the way servants are afraid, deeper. The way a person is afraid of something they created, like he knows what Ronan is capable of because he helped build it." The words settled into Celine's chest like a blade sliding between ribs. She thought about Theron's book, the cipher, the names, the deaths. He helped build it. Of course he had, 20 years beside a king, not just serving, but shaping, recording, enabling. Theron had not merely witnessed Ronan's darkness. He had maintained it, filed it, made it efficient. And somewhere along the way, the servant had become the architect, and the architect had become the prisoner, because you cannot hold the blueprints of a monster's house without the monster eventually realizing you know where all the doors are. Theron was not betraying Ronan out of conscience. He was betraying him out of self-preservation. The book, the letters, the manipulation. It was all an exit strategy. A way to ensure that when the Empire finally imploded, Theron Voss would be the last man standing in the rubble, holding the only copy of the truth, offering it to whoever was willing to pay the most. And Celine had walked straight into his design. She had taken his book. She had taken his information. She had built her plan on his foundation. And now she was standing in a tower, holding the blueprint of her own destruction, and the only question left was whether she could dismantle it fast enough to build something new. "I will come back," she told Evelina, "before the banquet. I will come back and I will tell you everything." Evelina nodded. She did not ask for reassurance. She did not ask for promises. She placed her hand on her belly where the baby had stilled and looked at Celine with an expression that was beyond fear, beyond hope, beyond any of the simple emotions that people on the outside believe defined a woman in crisis. It was patience. The terrible, ferocious patience of a mother who has nothing left to do but wait and nothing left to give but time. Celine left the tower. She descended through the passage into the gray light of a morning that smelled like wet stone and cold iron. She reached her study and locked the door and stood in the center of the room with Theron's book in one hand and Evelina's letter in the other, and felt the full weight of 11 days pressing down on her like the ceiling of a mine shaft beginning to collapse. She had a wounded commander hidden in her private chambers, a pregnant woman trapped in a tower, a king who was afraid of shadows, a steward who had been playing every side for 20 years, a compromised courier, a dead safe house, 4 dead soldiers on a frozen road. And she had a banquet, 11 days away, where every noble house, every commander, every advisor and ally and enemy in the Empire would gather under one roof and raise their glasses and pretend the world was as they wished it to be. She set the book and the letter on her desk. She sat down. She pulled a blank sheet of parchment toward her and picked up a quill and held it over the page and felt the tip tremble against the surface. She did not write a plan. Plans had failed her. Careful, logical, step-by-step strategies had been infiltrated and dismantled and used against her by a man whose entire existence was built on understanding how plans worked and how to turn them inside out. Instead, she wrote a question. What does Theron Voss want more than anything else in this world? She stared at it. She let the question fill the room. She let it press against the walls and the ceiling and the locked door and the cold window where dawn was breaking over an empire that did not know how close it was to falling apart. And somewhere in the silence between her heartbeat and the next, the answer came. Not as a revelation, not as a flash of brilliance, as a memory. Theron's voice in the kitchen. The flattest, most controlled voice she had ever heard, breaking, just barely, just once, on a single sentence. Because in 20 years, you are the first person in this palace who asked me a question and actually waited for the answer. He wanted to be seen. That was all. Under the manipulation, under the strategy, under 20 years of invisible service and buried secrets and careful positioning, he wanted someone to acknowledge that he existed as more than furniture. It was the smallest want, the most human. And it was the one thing that made him more dangerous than anyone in the Empire. Because a man who wanted power could be bought. A man who wanted revenge could be redirected. A man who wanted love could be trapped. But a man who wanted to be seen, who had spent 20 years being invisible and had built an empire of secrets as the only proof that he was real, that man could not be stopped by force or money or threats. He could only be stopped by giving him what he wanted. Celine set down the quill. She looked at the dawn breaking through her window, gray and gold and thin as a blade. She thought about the banquet hall, the long tables, the wine, the noble houses arrayed in their finery, the king at the head of the table, the queen beside him. And somewhere in the crowd, invisible as always, a steward with flat gray eyes and 20 years of buried dead behind them. She picked up the quill again. She began to write. Not a plan, not a list, a speech. The speech she would give at the winter moon banquet. The words that would crack the empire open like an egg and let everything inside it, the lies, the secrets, the blood, and the ambition and the terrible aching loneliness of people who had forgotten how to tell the truth, spill out onto the floor in front of 1,000 witnesses. She wrote for 3 hours. She crossed out and rewrote and crossed out again. She bled onto that page the way a surgeon bleeds into a wound, deliberately, precisely, knowing that the cut was necessary even as the knife shook in her hand. When she finished, the sun was fully up. The palace was awake. She could hear the distant sound of boots on stone and voices in corridors and the grinding machinery of a kingdom going through the motions of another day. She folded the speech. She sealed it with wax. She placed it in the hidden compartment of her desk, not the one Theron knew about, but a second one, built into the underside of the drawer that she had commissioned from a carpenter 2 years ago for reasons she could not have articulated at the time, but now understood with perfect clarity. She had always known this day would come. Not the details, not the names, but the shape of it, the moment when the walls she had built around her life would prove to be not protection, but camouflage, hiding a structure that was rotting from the inside. She stood. She straightened her coat. She looked in the mirror on the study wall and saw a woman she barely recognized, thin, dark-eyed, hard-jawed, with the expression of someone who had stopped hoping for a good outcome and started planning for a survivable one. 11 days. She had 11 days to outmaneuver a man who had been playing this game since before she entered the palace. She opened the door. She stepped into the corridor. She walked toward the council chamber with her head high and her speech sealed in a hidden drawer and the book of a dead empire's secrets pressing against her heart. And behind the walls, inside the passages, in the invisible spaces where servants moved and secrets lived, Theron Voss was watching. He was always watching. The night of the banquet, it snowed. Not the heavy, suffocating snow of the deep winter months, but something finer. A thin veil of white drifting down from a black sky, catching the torchlight along the palace walls and turning the courtyard into something that almost looked beautiful, almost looked clean. As if the world had decided to dress the empire in white one last time before it bled. Celine stood in her chambers and stared at her reflection in the long mirror beside the wardrobe. She had chosen her dress deliberately, black velvet, high-collared, silver thread along the sleeves. No jewels except the thin crown pinned against her dark hair. She looked like a blade someone had wrapped in cloth. She looked like a woman attending her own funeral and daring anyone to hand her flowers. Behind her, in the inner room, Lucien Vero was on his feet for the first time in 3 days. Marin had set his arm a week ago, a brutal, silent procedure that had required 2 men holding him down and a strip of leather between his teeth. The swelling had gone down. The bruises on his face had faded from purple to the yellowish green of old violence. He wore a borrowed formal coat, black, fitted, taken from the wardrobe of a lord who had died 2 years ago and whose clothes Celine had never bothered to discard. He looked like a dead man wearing a dead man's suit, which, given what they were about to do, felt appropriate. "You ready?" Celine said. She did not turn from the mirror. Lucien adjusted the collar with his good hand. His broken arm was bound tight against his chest beneath the coat, invisible unless you knew where to look. "No," he said. "Good. Neither am I." She turned to face him. They stood 3 feet apart in the candlelight of a queen's private chamber. 2 people who had met less than 2 weeks ago and were about to walk into a room full of the most powerful people in the empire and set fire to everything those people believed. She studied his face. The damage was still there, written in the crooked line of his nose and the scar tissue forming above his left eye. But underneath the wreckage, she saw the thing that Evelina must have seen: the steadiness. The unshakable, infuriating, almost stupid steadiness of a man who had decided what mattered and refused to let anything, including his own destruction, change his mind. She thought about what that kind of certainty cost. The 4 men dead on a frozen road. The broken arm. The 11 days of hiding in a room while the woman he loved sat in a tower 30 feet above his head and he could not reach her. Certainty was not free. It was the most expensive thing a person could carry, and the price was paid in silence and stillness and the slow, grinding patience of waiting for the moment when action finally meant something. When we enter the hall, Celine said, "You walk behind me, not beside me. Behind. You are my guest, not my equal. The court needs to see me in control. If they see partnership, they will assume conspiracy. If they see a queen with a soldier at her heel, they will assume authority." Lucien nodded. His jaw was tight. She could see him swallowing the instinct to argue, to push forward, to be the one leading. It was not in his nature to follow, but he had spent 11 days learning something that most powerful men never learned. That sometimes the bravest thing a strong person could do was step behind someone smarter and trust them with the wheel. "One more thing," Celine said. She reached into the inner pocket of her dress and pulled out a folded sheet of parchment. She held it out. Lucien took it. He unfolded it. He read it. His face did not change, but his hand, the good one, the one still capable of gripping a sword, began to shake. "This is your speech," he said. "Yes. You're going to say this, in front of everyone, every word." He folded the parchment and handed it back. He looked at her, and for the first time since he had arrived bleeding in the stables, something in his eyes softened. Not weakness, recognition. The silent acknowledgement of one soldier to another that the battle ahead was real and the odds were terrible, and neither of them was going to pretend otherwise. "You're the bravest person I have ever met," he said, "and I have led men into wars." Celine tucked the speech back into her pocket. She adjusted her crown. She smoothed the velvet of her sleeves. "Brave has nothing to do with it," she said. "I am out of options, and a person without options does not get to be afraid. Fear is a luxury for people who still have choices. I have one road left, and it runs straight through that banquet hall. So I am walking it, not because I am brave, because there is nowhere else to go." She opened the door. Marin was waiting in the corridor, armed, armored, her scarred face set in the grim mask she wore before violence. They walked. The great hall of Draven Keep was a cathedral of stone and firelight. 300 feet long, vaulted ceilings supported by columns as thick as old oaks, tapestries depicting 12 generations of Draven conquest hanging from iron rods above the heads of 1,000 guests. Long oak tables ran the length of the hall, laden with roasted game and winter fruits and the dark red Ceresian wine that Celine had personally approved from the cellar. Every bottle accounted for this time, every seal verified, every pour measured. The court was assembled. Noble houses from every province, their lords and ladies dressed in silk and fur, and the careful competitive elegance of people for whom appearance was the first line of defense. Military commanders in formal black, trade envoys in embroidered coats, advisors, scribes, clerks, and the small army of servants who moved between the tables like ghosts, filling cups and clearing plates and keeping the machinery of privilege running smoothly. At the head of the hall, on a raised dais lit by a dozen iron candelabras, sat the king. Ronan Draven looked like a man who had been assembled from spare parts of the ruler he used to be. His formal coat was immaculate, black wool, gold thread, the Draven crest embroidered across the chest in crimson. His crown sat heavy on dark hair that was grayer at the temples than it had been a year ago. His hands rested on the arms of his chair, perfectly still, the way a predator rests when it is conserving energy for a strike it has already decided to make. But his eyes were wrong. Celine saw it the moment she entered the hall. His eyes were moving, not slowly, not calmly, but with the rapid feral scanning of a man who is looking for something he was afraid to find. He swept the room in short, jerking arcs, his gaze catching on faces and releasing them, never settling, never resting. He was afraid. Petra had been right. Theron had been right. The king was afraid. and a frightened king in a room full of sharp people was the most volatile substance in the known world. Celine walked the length of the hall. She walked slowly. She let every eye in the room find her, track her, assess her. She walked the way she had walked through every crisis of the past 12 years, with the measured, deliberate grace of a woman who understood that posture was politics and movement was message. Lucien walked behind her, 3 paces back, exactly as she had instructed. He kept his eyes forward and his damaged face neutral, and his broken arm hidden beneath the dead lord's coat. She reached the dais. She climbed the 3 stone steps. She took her seat beside the king. Ronan did not look at her. He was staring at a point somewhere above the crowd, his jaw working, his fingers pressing into the wood of his chair. "You are late," he said. "I am here," Celine said. The banquet proceeded. Courses were served: roasted venison, braised root vegetables, pies filled with dark game meat and winter herbs. Wine flowed. Voices rose. The hall filled with the warm, layered noise of 1,000 people eating and drinking and performing the social theater that passed for community among the powerful. Celine ate nothing. She drank nothing. She sat beside her husband and watched the room with the same careful attention she had given to ledgers and supply chains for 12 years, reading the currents of power and allegiance that moved beneath the surface of every conversation. She spotted Lady Petra at the far end of the second table, eating slowly, her eyes flicking toward the dais at regular intervals. Watching. She spotted Lord Cassius near the center of the hall, deep in conversation with a trade envoy, his spectacles reflecting the candlelight. Oblivious. She spotted Theron Voss standing in the shadows near the service entrance, hands folded behind his back, his thin frame perfectly still. He was not watching the crowd. He was watching her. Their eyes met across the length of the hall, 300 feet of noise and light and human theater between them. And in that brief connection, Celine saw what she had spent 11 days preparing to see. Confirmation. Theron knew what was coming. He had known since she wrote the speech. He had probably known before she wrote it, because men like Theron did not need to read the script. They read the actors. He gave her nothing. No nod, no signal, no acknowledgement. He simply looked at her the way he had always looked, with the flat, patient attention of a man who had been watching things unfold for 20 years and had learned that the best position was the one where nobody remembered you were in the room. Celine broke the gaze. She turned to Ronan. "The midnight toast is in 20 minutes, she said. "I know," Ronan said. His voice was sandpaper. His eyes were still scanning the room. "I would like to speak before the toast." Ronan's jaw tightened. About what? The kingdom. He turned to look at her for the first time all evening. His black eyes searched her face with the desperate, hungry intensity of a man looking for a lie he could use as evidence that the world was still the way he needed it to be. "The kingdom is fine," he said. "The kingdom is not fine," Celine said. Her voice was low, calm, pitched so that only he could hear. "And you know it, and I know it. And in 20 minutes, everyone in this room is going to know it too. You can let me speak now, in my own words, with whatever dignity we have left. Or you can try to stop me, and I will speak anyway, and the only difference will be that the court watches you silence your own queen in front of 1,000 witnesses." She held his gaze. She did not blink. She did not breathe. She sat beside the man she had married 12 years ago and felt the distance between them. Not the physical inches, but the vast, unmeasurable space that opens up when two people who once chose each other realize they have been standing on opposite sides of a lie so large that neither of them can see the edges anymore. Ronan stared at her. She watched something move behind his eyes. Fury, fear, calculation, and beneath all of it, the exhausted, flickering remnant of a man who had once taken her hand in front of 1,000 witnesses and meant the words he said. 5 minutes, he said. Then the toast. Celine stood. The hall did not go quiet immediately. These things take time. The gradual ripple of attention spreading outward from the dais as heads turned and conversations trailed off, and the social instinct that makes humans look toward authority kicked in. But it went quiet. It always did for a queen, even one they had spent 12 years underestimating. She looked out at the hall, 1,000 faces, candlelight on silk and silver, the smell of roasted meat and wine, and the faint, ever-present tang of stone and cold that lived in the bones of Draven Keep. She found Lucien in the crowd. He was standing near the fourth table, his back against a column, his one good eye fixed on her. She saw his hand, the steady one, pressed flat against his thigh, holding himself still. She found Petra. The older woman had stopped eating. Her fork was suspended in midair, forgotten. She found Theron, still in the shadows, still watching. She unfolded the speech. She did not read from it. She had memorized every word. But she held the paper in her hands because she wanted the court to see it, to understand that what she was about to say was not spontaneous. It was deliberate. It was documented. It was the result of weeks of investigation and years of silence and a lifetime of being the woman who kept the records while the men kept the power. For 12 years, she said, her voice carried, clear, controlled, not loud. She did not need loud. She needed gravity, and gravity was quiet. For 12 years, I have served this empire as its queen. I have managed its treasury, its supply chains, its civilian governance. I have survived assassination attempts and famine and the slow, grinding loneliness of a marriage that stopped being a partnership long before either of us had the courage to admit it. The hall was silent, completely, devastatingly silent. 1,000 people holding their breath. I did not come here tonight to complain about my marriage, she continued. I came here to tell you the truth, because the truth has been locked in a tower inside this palace for 9 months, and it is time to let it out. Ronan's chair scraped against the stone behind her. She heard him stand. She felt his presence at her back, the heat of his body, the weight of his fury, the massive, dangerous energy of a man watching his world disintegrate in real time. She did not turn around. There is a woman in the West Tower, Celine said. Her name is Evelina Dane. She is 9 months pregnant. The king brought her to this palace and hid her from the court, and from me because he believed the child she carries is his heir. The silence in the hall became something physical, a pressure, a density, as if the air itself had hardened. The child is not his. Celine let the words land. She let them sit in the room the way a surgeon lets a patient feel the incision before continuing. The father of the child is Commander Lucien Vero, she said, and he is standing in this room tonight. Every head in the hall turned. The 1,000-headed beast of the court swiveled toward the fourth table, toward the column, toward the man in the dead lord's coat who stood with his back straight and his broken arm hidden and his face carrying the evidence of an ambush that had been arranged by the very steward now standing in the shadows by the service door. Lucien did not move. He did not speak. He stood there and took it, the weight of 1,000 stares, the judgment, the fury, the pity, and his one good eye stayed fixed on Celine as if she were the only real thing in a room full of ghosts. Behind Celine, Ronan made a sound, low, guttural, the sound of a man whose chest is being opened without anesthesia. She turned to face him. He was standing. His hands were at his sides, fists clenched so tight the tendons stood out like ropes beneath his skin. His face was white, not pale, white, the color of absolute shock, the color of a man watching his own reflection shatter and realizing every piece is a lie, he told himself. You, he said. His voice was barely audible. He was looking past Celine across the hall at Lucy. And Celine stepped between them. She put her body in the line of sight. She put herself between the king and the commander the way she had been putting herself between powerful men and catastrophe for 12 years, physically, deliberately, with the full weight of her position and her presence. It is done, she said. She spoke only to Ronan. The court is watching. Every noble house in the empire is watching. What you do in the next 60 seconds determines whether this kingdom survives or burns. Choose. Ronan's eyes dropped to her face. She saw it all. The rage, the humiliation, the animal instinct to destroy something, anything, to make the pain stop. She saw the Alpha King in full, ugly display, stripped of his mythology, standing in front of 1,000 witnesses with his crown on his head and his empire crumbling around his feet, and nothing left to hide behind. And she saw the moment he broke. Not violently, not dramatically. The break was quiet, internal. A structural failure deep in the architecture of a man who had spent his entire life believing he was the strongest thing in the room and was now discovering in front of everyone who mattered that strength without honesty was just weight, just mass, just the slow, crushing burden of holding up a building that had no foundation. His fists unclenched, his shoulders dropped, His jaw loosened, and the rigid mask of the Alpha King dissolved into something rawer and more terrible. The face of a man. Just a man. Standing in a hall full of people who had feared him for years and watching them see, for the first time, that he was not what they thought. He sat down. The chair creaked under his weight. He put his hands on the table and stared at them. The knuckles, the scars, the fingers that had signed orders and held swords and built an empire and never once reached for the truth when a convenient lie was available. The hall erupted, not in violence, in sound. The deep rolling thunder of 1,000 voices speaking at once, questions, accusations, demands, the raw noise of a power structure realizing it had been standing on rotten wood. Lords turned to ladies. Commanders turned to advisors. Servants froze in place with trays in their hands and mouths open, and the sudden vertiginous understanding that the world they served had just changed shape beneath their feet. Celine let it happen. She stood on the dais and let the chaos wash over her, the way a woman who has spent 12 years managing crises lets a crisis run its first wave, not fighting it, not fleeing it, but standing still and watching the currents and waiting for the moment when intervention becomes possible. She found Petra in the crowd. The older woman was on her feet, her face hard, her eyes locked on Celine. She gave the smallest nod, barely a movement, a fraction of an inch. But it was enough. The council had its first vote. Celine raised her hand. Not dramatically, just high enough to be seen. The gesture of a woman requesting silence from a room that had forgotten she was the one who kept it fed. The noise subsided. Not instantly, in waves, like a tide pulling back. "Commander Varro," Celine said. She did not look at him. She looked at the court. She addressed the room. "Step forward." Lucien moved. He walked through the crowd the way a man walks through a battlefield. Not around the obstacles, but through them, shoulders forward, eyes fixed. The measured stride of someone who has accepted that the next few minutes will determine whether he lives or dies. He reached the dais. He climbed the steps. He stood before the king and the queen and 1,000 witnesses, and he did not kneel. Ronan looked up at him. The two men, the same height, the same build, the same species of dangerous, stared at each other across a distance of 3 feet and 12 years of brotherhood, and one woman and one child, and the infinite, unbridgeable chasm between what they had been to each other and what they were now. "Brother," Ronan said. The word came out like a bone breaking. Lucian's jaw tightened. He did not respond. There was no word in any language that could answer what that single word contained. The betrayal, the love, the rage, the grief. "The child is yours," Ronan said. It was not a question. "Yes, and Evelina. I love her." Ronan closed his eyes. His hands were flat on the table, fingers spread, pressing into the wood as if trying to hold on to something solid in a world that had gone liquid. "I would have given her everything," Ronan said. "She did not want everything," Lucian said. "She wanted to be free." The words hung in the hall like the last note of a bell. They resonated against the stone walls and the iron candelabras and the tapestries of conquest, and they settled, slowly, into the silence that follows all great truths. Not the silence of shock, but the silence of recognition. The silence of a room full of people hearing something they had always known but never dared to say. Celine stepped forward. She stood between the two men facing the court. She spoke. "Commander Varro will be stripped of his title and command," she said. "He will be exiled beyond the northern borders for a period determined by the Royal Council. This is the law. This is the consequence." She paused. The hall held its breath. Evelina Dane will be moved from the West Tower to a secure location where she will receive proper care for the remainder of her pregnancy. After the birth, she will be escorted from the capital. She will not return. She turned to Ronan. She looked at him with the full weight of 12 years. The loneliness, the silence, the swallowed rage, the poisoned needles, the unsigned trade agreements, and the cold tea, and the night spent staring at a ceiling while the man beside her dreamed of someone else. "And the king," she said, "the king will answer to his council. Not tonight. Tonight the king will sit with what he has done. And tomorrow we rebuild." She folded the speech. She placed it on the table in front of Ronan. She turned and walked down the steps of the dais, through the silent crowd, past the long tables with their untouched wine and their cooling meat, toward the great doors at the far end of the hall. Marin fell into step beside her. Then Petra. Then Lord Cassius, who had removed his spectacles and was blinking rapidly in the manner of a man whose entire filing system had just been reorganized without his consent. Celine did not look back. She walked out of the great hall and into the snow. The weeks that followed were the hardest of Celine's life. Harder than the silence, harder than the loneliness, harder than the night she had opened the tower gate and found a girl in her nightgown. Because rebuilding was harder than breaking. It always was. Destruction was simple, a single act, a single moment, a single word spoken in front of 1,000 witnesses. Creation was slow and painful and full of the unglamorous work of sitting in rooms with difficult people and making decisions that no one liked and enforcing consequences that hurt everyone, including herself. Lucien was stripped of his command 3 days after the banquet. The ceremony was brief and brutal, his sword taken, his insignia removed, his name struck from the military rolls by a clerk who could not meet his eyes. He stood through it with the same terrible steadiness he had shown in the banquet hall, and when it was done, he walked out of the palace gates and onto the northern road with nothing but the clothes on his back and the knowledge that somewhere behind those walls, a woman was carrying his child. Celine watched from the ramparts. She watched until he was a dark shape against the white road, growing smaller with every step, and then she turned away and went back to work. Evelina gave birth 11 days after the banquet. A boy, healthy, loud. The kind of newborn scream that cut through stone walls and closed doors, and the careful insulation that powerful people built around themselves to avoid hearing things that inconvenienced them. Celine was not present for the birth. She had arranged for Dr. Wren to attend, along with 2 midwives from the lower city whom Marin had vetted personally. The delivery was difficult. Wren had been right about the risks. But Evelina survived. The boy survived. Celine visited 2 days later. Evelina was sitting up in bed in the secure room Theron had prepared. Not the tower, not the deep chamber, but a clean, well-lit space in the eastern wing with a window that looked out over the courtyard where the snow was beginning to melt. The baby was asleep in a wooden cradle beside the bed. Small, red-faced, fists clenched. He looked like every newborn Celine had ever seen. A compressed version of a person, full of potential and utterly unaware of the chaos his existence had caused. "Have you named him?" Celine asked. Evelina looked at her. She was exhausted. Dark circles, cracked lips, hair matted with sweat. But there was something in her face that had not been there before. Not happiness, not relief. Something quieter and more durable. The expression of a woman who had passed through the worst thing she could imagine and discovered that she was still here on the other side, still breathing, still holding the thing she had fought to protect. "Ash," Evelina said, "after the province where his father and I met." Celine looked at the baby. She looked at Evelina. She thought about the tower room, the silk nightgown, the vanity, the letters hidden in the false-bottomed drawer. She thought about the girl she had found 5 months ago, terrified and pregnant, and wearing a stolen queen's clothing. She thought about the woman sitting in front of her now, battered and worn, and holding a name for her son like it was the first real thing she had ever owned. "You leave in 3 weeks," Celine said, "after you are strong enough to travel. Marin will arrange an escort to the eastern provinces. There is a village called Thornhaven, small, quiet, far enough from the capital that your name will not follow you. A house has been arranged. And funds." Evelina nodded. She did not cry. She did not argue. She had used up all her tears in the tower, wrung them out of herself night after night, until there was nothing left but the dry, clear-eyed acceptance of a woman who understood that consequences were not punishments. They were the price of the choices she had made, and she was willing to pay because the alternative, a life built on the continuation of a lie, was a price she could no longer afford. "Will he be able to find us?" she asked. Celine understood who he was. Lucien, exiled, somewhere beyond the northern borders, walking through frozen terrain toward a future he could not yet see. She hesitated. The law said no. The law said exile meant severance, from the kingdom, from the court, from every person and place the exiled man had known. The law was clear and the law was necessary because an empire without consequences was not an empire. It was a suggestion. But the law was also a thing written by men in rooms, and Celine had spent the last 5 weeks learning that the distance between what was written and what was right was sometimes the widest space in the world. Thornhaven is near the eastern border, Celine said. And the eastern border is not well patrolled. People cross it in both directions regularly. Traders, travelers, men with new names and old reasons. She did not say more. She did not need to. Evelina's eyes widened, and the faintest trace of something, not hope, not quite, but the precursor to hope, the first green thing pushing through frozen ground, moved across her face. Celine stood. She looked at the baby one more time. She looked at Evelina. You survived, Celine said. Remember that. Whatever comes next, whatever this world throws at you and that boy. You survived the worst of it already, and you did it not by being strong. You did it by being honest when honesty was the most dangerous thing you could be. Do not forget that. She left the room. She dealt with Theron last, not because he was the least important, because he was the most complex. And Celine had learned in the exhausting weeks since the banquet that complexity required patience, and patience required a kind of strength that had nothing to do with swords or speeches or standing on a dais in front of 1,000 people. She found him in the kitchens. Where else? He was reviewing a menu. Of course he was. The world had cracked open and rearranged itself, and Theron Voss was still standing at the preparation table with his hands folded behind his back and his thin frame draped in dark cloth, checking the evening meal as if nothing had changed. Everything had changed. Celine closed the kitchen door. She stood across the table from him and placed the leather-bound book between them. Theron looked at it. He did not reach for it. He did not need to. He knew every page. You wanted to be seen, Celine said. Theron raised his eyes to hers, the flat gray gaze, the absolute stillness, the face of a man who had spent 20 years making himself invisible and had finally been found. Yes, he said. You arranged the ambush at Greyvale. 4 men died. Yes. The word landed in the kitchen like a stone dropped into oil. No ripple, no splash, just the slow spreading weight of a confession offered without apology, because apology would have been dishonest, and whatever else Theron was, manipulator, architect, survivor, he was not, in this final moment, a liar. Celine looked at him. She studied the face she had been trying to read for weeks. The thin mouth, the sharp jaw, the eyes that gave nothing, because they had learned very early that giving meant losing. She thought about what it cost to be invisible for 20 years. Not merely overlooked, but actively, deliberately unseen. A man who had made himself so essential to the machinery of power that he had become part of the machinery itself, indistinguishable from the gears and levers he operated. He had sacrificed his identity to maintain his position, and in doing so, he had become the most powerful person in the palace and the most alone. She understood him. She did not forgive him. Understanding and forgiveness were not the same thing, and she was tired of a world that pretended they were. You will leave the capital, she said, not exile. Reassignment. I am sending you to the Eastern Administrative Office in Thornhaven. You will manage supply logistics for the border provinces. Theron blinked. It was the first involuntary reaction she had ever seen from him. His mask slipped. Not much, not for long, but enough for her to see the confusion beneath. Thornhaven, he repeated. It is a small town. Quiet. The kind of place where a man with your skills will be noticed immediately because there is no crowd to disappear into. You will be seen, Theron, every day, by everyone. The baker and the blacksmith and the widow who runs the post office. You will be a person there instead of a function, and you will carry the weight of what you did at Greyvale for the rest of your life. Not as a punishment imposed from outside, but as the thing you see in the mirror every morning when there is no one left to hide behind. She picked up the book. She held it for a moment, felt the leather, the weight, the 20 years of buried truth contained inside. Then she opened the kitchen hearth and placed it in the fire. The leather caught slowly. The pages curled. The ink blackened and the names disappeared, and the careful cipher that had documented 2 decades of a king's darkest acts dissolved into ash and smoke, and the clean, purifying nothing of destruction. Theron watched it burn. His face was unreadable. But his hands, the hands that were always folded, always controlled, always perfectly still, were trembling. Celine walked out of the kitchen without looking back. She dealt with Ronan last of all, not in the council chamber, not in the war room, Not in any of the formal spaces where kings performed the theater of authority. She found him in the West Tower. He was standing in the room where Evelina had lived for 9 months. The furniture was gone, the bed, the vanity, the bookshelf, the cushioned chair. The room had been stripped to bare stone. The fire was dead. The narrow window let in a thin column of gray afternoon light that fell across the floor like a scar. Ronan stood in the center of the empty room with his hands at his sides. He was not wearing his crown. He was not wearing his formal coat. He wore the simple dark shirt and trousers of a man who had stopped performing and was standing, for the first time in years, in the space between who he pretended to be and who he actually was. He did not turn when she entered. Celine stood in the doorway. She looked at his back, the broad shoulders, the heavy frame, the posture that had once conveyed authority and now conveyed only the weight of a man carrying something he could not set down. She thought about the night of their bonding ceremony, 22 years old, his hand in hers, the words he had spoken. I bind my blood to yours. I bind my shadow to your light. What I am, you will share. What I carry, you will know. She had not known. For 12 years she had not known. And the question she had been avoiding since the night she opened the tower gate finally forced its way to the surface, demanding an answer she was not sure she could give. Did any of it matter? The 12 years? The partnership? The slow construction of a shared life built on the assumption that the other person was telling the truth. If the foundation was a lie, did the structure count? Were the good years real if the bad ones were hidden? Could a marriage survive the discovery that one half of it had been a ghost? A performance of presence masking a fundamental absence? She did not know. She was not sure anyone knew. But she was standing in the doorway of an empty room inside a tower that had held a secret for 9 months, and the man she had married was standing in the center of it, looking lost, and she was the only person in the empire who could reach him. Not because she wanted to, because she was the only one left. I'm not going to ask you why, she said. Ronan did not move. His voice came out rough and broken, scraped raw by weeks of silence and self-confrontation. Why not? Because why does not matter. You were lonely, you were afraid. You found someone who made the loneliness smaller for a little while. I understand that. I have been lonely too. The difference is that I did not build a prison to hide my loneliness inside. I sat with it. I let it hurt. And I am still here. He turned. His face was aged. Not by time, but by the accelerated erosion of a man who had been forced to look at himself without the armor of authority. His eyes were red. His jaw was slack. He looked like a ruin, like something that had once been grand and was now just honest. I do not know how to fix this, he said. You do not fix it, Celine said. You do not get to fix it. That is the part you have never understood, Ronan. You cannot build your way out of this. You cannot sign an order or deploy a garrison or hide the damage in a tower and pretend it is not there. The only thing you can do is stand in the wreckage and decide who you are going to be inside it. She stepped into the room. She walked across the bare stone floor until she was standing in front of him, close enough to see the broken blood vessels in his eyes, close enough to smell the stale sweat and the exhaustion and the sour human scent of a man who had stopped taking care of himself because the self he had been taking care of turned out to be a fiction. I am not forgiving you, she said. Not today. Maybe not ever. But I'm standing here, and I'm telling you that the kingdom needs to be rebuilt, and I cannot do it alone, and you owe me. You owe this empire. The rest of your life spent trying to deserve the throne you almost destroyed. Ronan looked at her. He looked at her the way a drowning man looks at the surface of the water, with the desperate, incredulous recognition that survival is possible, and the terrified understanding that reaching it will require letting go of everything that pulled him under. New terms, Celine said. No more secrets. No more towers. No more women hidden in darkness. You answer to the council. You answer to me. And you spend whatever years you have left earning back the trust you burned. She held out her hand, not for a grip, not for a handshake, for something simpler, something older, an open palm, the gesture of a person offering not forgiveness but presence, the willingness to stand in the same room, breathe the same air, and begin the long, unglamorous, painful work of building something true on the ashes of something false. Ronan looked at her hand. He looked at it for a long time. And then, slowly, with the careful, terrified precision of a man touching something he is afraid he will break, he took it. They stood in the empty tower room, two people holding hands in a space that had held alive for 9 months and now held nothing but dust and gray light and the faint, persistent smell of candle wax. Outside, the snow was melting. 3 months later, the West Tower came down. Celine ordered it herself. She stood in the courtyard and watched the workers, masons, laborers, men with hammers and chisels, and the brute, physical competence of people who understood that some structures were beyond repair, dismantle the tower stone by stone. It took 4 days. Each block was carried out through the main gate and loaded onto wagons and driven to the river, where they were dumped into the current and carried away. On the 4th day, when the last wall fell and the space where the tower had stood was nothing but a flat expanse of broken foundation, Celine walked to the edge and looked down. The base was exposed. Centuries of accumulated debris, broken mortar, rusted iron, fragments of things built and forgotten and built again. The history of a structure that had served a dozen different purposes over the life of the keep, each one layered on top of the last, none of them visible from the outside. She looked at it. She thought about Evelina, 3 months settled in Thornhaven, learning to live in a house with windows that opened. She thought about Lucien, somewhere beyond the borders, carrying the weight of exile and the hope of an eastern crossing. She thought about Theron, filing supply orders in a small town where everyone knew his name. She thought about Ronan, sitting in a council chamber, learning to listen instead of command. She thought about herself, 34 years old, gray-eyed, tired, standing on the edge of a hole where a tower used to be, wearing a crown she had never asked for and holding a kingdom together with both hands. She was not healed. Healing was not the right word for what happened after a thing like this. There was no return to the person she had been before the tower gate opened. That woman was gone, dissolved, shed, left behind like a skin that no longer fit. The woman standing here now was someone new, not better, not worse, just more honest, more scarred, more willing to sit with the pain of knowing the truth instead of the comfort of believing a lie. She looked at the sky, clear, blue, the first real warmth of spring pressing against the winter air. Marin appeared beside her. The guard said nothing. She stood with her hand on her sword and her scarred face turned toward the sun and watched the last stones of the West Tower disappear into the river. "What now?" Marin said. Celine looked at the empty foundation. She looked at the space where the walls had been, the walls that had hidden a woman, a lie, a kingdom's worth of fear and silence, and the terrible things people do when they believe no one is watching. "Now we fill it in," she said, "and we build something else." She turned away from the hole in the ground and walked back toward the palace, toward the council chamber, toward the endless, grinding, necessary work of holding a kingdom together with nothing but her hands and her will, and the hard-won understanding that the strongest thing a person could build was not a tower or a throne or an empire. It was the truth. And the truth, she had learned, did not need walls.